Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto built a powerful harem with Kurenai, Tenten, Anko, Hanabi, Hinata, Sakura, Ino, Yakumo, and Shizuka? If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. Chapter 1. She watched the flames of the fireplace move in their endless dance, sitting with one hand holding a cup of sake and the other passing the fabric of her haori between her fingers. The cold November breeze sent a chill down her spine, even with the fire roaring right in front of her. Tsunade was thinking about the last events of the year. Against all odds, the 5 hidden villages were at peace, something her grandpa could only imagine in his wildest dreams. Now the 5 Kage were working as a team, a shinobi alliance, a dream that the world had abandoned. The fire's flames followed a fluid and hypnotic movement. It was endless and unstoppable, just like the will of the village that she'd led until recently. Taking the last sips of the bitter elixir, Tsunade remembered her life. Everyone saw the Senju last name as an honor, but the story was different for Tsunade. From the moment of her birth, everyone expected something from her grandfather's wood element to her grandmother's chakra chains. That was only the beginning of people's expectations of her. Despite the help of her clan, she couldn't help but feel that she simply did not measure up to what people expected of the shinobi princess of Konoha. She then did the only thing she could, train and train. Her 6-year-old self would be dumbfounded to hear that her older self was grateful for the brutal training methods her uncle Tobirama applied. Once she was in the war ranks a few years later, she was thankful for how inclement her uncle had been. And if there was one thing that marked Tsunade in this life, it was war. 12 years was too cruel of an age to see your friends from the academy die in front of you. And now, looking back, she regretted having to grow up so quickly. Genin at age 6, Chunin by age 12, and Jonin at the prodigious age of 17. She remembered being an eager-to-fight Genin, ready to prove herself to everyone, and Kami, she missed it. Running around Konoha, complaining about doing D ranks with her squad, oblivious to everything. Damn it, she missed her teammates most of all. After taking a moment to gather her strength, Tsunade got up from her seat and walked unsteadily towards the table across the room. Ignoring the smattering of paperwork on top of the table, she leant down and opened the right underneath. That cabinet held 2 things that were precious to her: photos of her teammates and her most expensive booze. And if she was going through the pain of going down memory lane today, the least she deserved was to do it while indulging in her vice. She gathered the photographs in one hand and the bottle of sake in the other before slamming the cabinet shut with a leg. The room wobbled around her as she slowly returned to the chair by the fireplace. Looking at her old photos was undeniably painful. Instead of happy memories, they held concrete proof of all she has lost. She every once in a while felt the urge to burn them, as if turning them into ash would take the pain away. Of course, she couldn't really bring herself to do it. As painful as they were, her photos were still one of the last ties she had with all those people. At the top of the stack was a photo of her old Genin team. Her teammates, people she grew up with, both as a ninja and as a person. Despite what many people thought, Orochimaru wasn't always that amoral genius obsessed with immortality. He used to be her friend and a sweet, caring guy that would do just about anything for his teammates. After fighting, bleeding, and almost dying together in many battlefields, you couldn't help but form strong bonds even if the dark-haired Sannin would deny caring about anyone aside from himself. No matter what happened later on, Tsunade still had many fond memories of them together. Like the time they laughed together at Jiraiya for being tied to the post back when they were fresh out of the academy. Or the time Jiraiya convinced him to dress up as a rogue nin to try and gain her over as if she needed a knight in shining armor. And then there was Jiraiya. There was so much to be said about that perverted idiot. Most of her memories of Jiraiya had him getting on her nerves by trying to woo her, and yet there she was fondly remembering him with the kind of love only one other man had received for her. He would probably be doing one of his eccentric happy dances after finding out that she was the one missing him after all those years of rejection. Not wishing to dwell on it, she flicked through the remaining photographs. Many were family photos from when she was a kid. Photos of a young Tsunade with her parents, grandparents, uncles, and so on. These photos would be unremarkable for most families, but it was all Tsunade had left of the Senju clan. She continued browsing, finding some more somber family photos where she was failing to not look bored, and a well-worn photo of her uncle Inaku carrying her and Naoki on his back. Since her mother passed away while delivering Naoki, she didn't really have a complete photo of her family. The thought had always pained her, no matter how many years passed. There were a lot of photos of Naoki as well, most of them taken by her. That also meant they were usually out of focus or messed up in some other way. There was one in the bunch that stood out, the one taken after he graduated from the academy. The photo showed Tsunade and Naoki, with the latter proudly displaying his new forehead protector with a giant smile on his face. Both of them looked so unbelievably happy in the photo that Tsunade felt tears pricking at the corner of her eyes. Before Naoki went and died, before the brutal war grinded her team down, before Orochimaru left the village, before it all got so messed up. She'd passed the page not wanting to spend any longer looking at it. Next up, there was the most recent picture of her collection. It was her, Jiraiya and Naruto. Shizune had snapped that one afternoon they both took Naruto out to eat. The brat was staring at the camera with his trademark grin, looking no older than 13. Tsunade and Jiraiya were sitting on either side, not matching Naruto's enthusiasm but smiling nonetheless. The picture was taken in one of the rare moments where they didn't drive her nuts. One could have mistaken them as family in that photograph. After pushing people away for so long, she finally found a reason to care again. And at that moment, it all felt worth it. But life had a funny way of working out. Jiraiya was taken from them far too soon and the whole thing just collapsed. Of all the regrets in her life, and there were a lot, that was one of her biggest. She tried so hard to protect him from the curse of her love, and yet here she was mourning once again. How she wished she'd told him that his feelings were reciprocated. He would have been so proud of seeing Naruto accomplishing all he did. Tears pickled her eyes at the thought. No use to dwell on it, she was over it already, it was just the sake making her nostalgic. She repeated to herself, that comforting lie. "Happy birthday, you perverted baka." She muttered, raising the bottle high in the air before drinking it all to the last. Liquor was bitter as it went down her throat but she savored the feeling, letting it mask the tears falling from her eyes. "I miss you," she whispered as tears overflowed her visage. All the photographs slipped from her hand and fell on the floor. A few seconds passed before Tsunade leaned down to scoop them up. It was enough mourning for a day. She needed sleep, and hopefully, the amount of sake in her system was enough to stop that trip into her unconscious from becoming memorable. She really wasn't in the mood for nightmares today. In the fireplace, the dwindling flames were chewing on the last few bits of wood and the warmth was long gone. Without bothering to extinguish it, Tsunade got up and stumbled towards her room. Once inside the covers of her bed, she let herself be welcomed to a dreamless sleep. Tsunade loved sake. That fact wasn't a secret to anybody. Her love for the alcoholic beverage was just as well known as her Sanin reputation or her lousy luck. And today, of all days, she thanked whatever superior beings existed for that holy liquid. She slept like a rock throughout the night. She had such a lovely warm comfy rest under her covers, made even better by the dreamless sleep. If it wasn't for someone banging on her door, she could have stayed like this all day. Reluctantly opening her eyes, voice thick with sleep, she muttered, "Shizune, 5 more minutes, I'm not Hokage anymore." The banging stopped and almost in cue she curled deeper into her bed trying to find a comfortable position once again. Tossing the blanket off, the warmth inside her covers becoming too much. Her rest couldn't have lasted more than 5 minutes before the knocking sound appeared once again, this time though it was accompanied by a scream. "Sun-chan, it's 9 already, time to wake up." She had to be dreaming. She had to be dreaming because there was no chance someone was using that nickname and even less that they were saying it in that voice. The same voice that woke her up every day for more than a decade. What in the hell did the sake do? Tsunade knew never to mix cheap sake with an expensive one, but this had to be a bad joke. A distasteful joke played by her unconscious because there was no way that the person she thought was behind the door could be there. Getting up from the bed faster than she had done in years, Tsunade opened the door to find an annoyed-looking woman staring back at her. "Mito ba-chan?" she finally asked, voice shaking in disbelief. Chapter 2. Mito ba-chan. Tsunade was in utter shock. Did she die in her sleep? She had to be dead. There's no other possible explanation for being face to face with her grandma, a woman who's been dead for over 3 decades. Damn, Sun-chan, I know you've been drinking a lot lately, but at least change into your pajamas before sleeping. Quote, whoever knew Uzumaki Mito would have described her as a kind soul, reserved, and polite to no end. Being the Shidaim's wife, Mito learned better than anyone the art of deceit. In the commodity house, though, Mito Uzumaki was an Uzumaki through and through. No one who had shared a day of their life talking with Uzumaki Mito would describe her as a loud woman with a strong personality and a kind of raunchy humor. Then again, those people weren't the grandkid that lived with her since age 6. If people thought Tsunade had a strong personality, they'd be blown away by Mito. She was brought back from her thoughts by the sound of someone snapping their fingers in her face. What are you staring at, kid? Did the sake burn your neurons already? Tsunade had never slammed a door in someone's face so fast. Breath in. Mito couldn't be there. Mito couldn't be alive. Breath out. Senju Tsunade, you have up to the count of 3 to open that damn door. Mito's voice reverberating through the room reminded her of what she currently wanted to forget. Stop listening and start paying attention. Decades of shinobi training snapped into place in an instant, and she scanned the room. She'd found herself in an almost perfect replica of her childhood room. A massive wardrobe dominated one side of the room, leaving very little room for much else. On the other side, though, were posters, drawings, and photographs covering the entire wall. A well-built dresser occupied the space there, its surface almost overflowing with books, loose paper, and other materials. Beneath Tsunade's feet was a cozy olive green rug that covered the floor from corner to corner. Directly in front of her was a sturdy door peppered with tiny marks and some noticeable gashes carved into the wood. Behind her, a massive window bathed the room in the warm, golden glow of morning time. The large bed sat right under the window, the blankets in disarray. It had been used recently. Okay, an exact replica of the room from her childhood. One small item drew her attention in particular. A package that sat on the top of the dresser, clumsily wrapped in gaudy-looking paper. She would have kept studying it if the door hadn't been violently thrown off its hinges. Tsunade stood, frozen like a child caught with their hand in the cookie jar, as an incensed Mito Uzumaki barged into the room. Little Su-chan sneaking out for a drink is one thing, but slamming the door in my face. Tsunade is an experienced shinobi. Scratch that, a legendary shinobi with 3 wars under her belt and a title of the Hokage with irreproachable composure in spades. Mito Uzumaki, however, was scary. Even now, when she wasn't sure if she was even awake, Tsunade felt an instinctual, familiar fear creep up inside her. A considerable part of her wanted to run up, give her a hug, clinging to her in hopes that she'd somehow make everything better. Another, more battle-hardened part wanted to throw a punch. An illusion, an imposter, or some kind of trick, obviously. People don't come back to life. Unless Orochimaru was playing Onid-up prank here. Though Mito's face softened once her eyes caught a glimpse of Tsunade's visage. Su-chan. Tsunade had to suppress the urge to jump back when Mito gently touched her on the shoulder. Is everything alright? Do I need to kill that frog boy? Words were caught in her throat, and she was just able to let a cry out as the urge to hug her grandma close took over. Before she knew it, Tsunade had lurched forward and thrown her arms around the other woman. Whatever Mito was about to say was lost as she looked at her granddaughter clinging to her like a lifeline. Mito Ba-chan, she said as her eyes began to water, and she felt the floodgates open. Here, sweetie, I am here for you. Mito shushed as Tsunade buried her face deeper into her grandmother's shoulder, the scent of roses overtaking her as she did so. Familiar, comforting pats on her back slowly lulled her into a trance. If this was genjutsu, then it was a pretty damn good one. Hell, not even the infinite Tsukuyomi felt this real. Let's get some food in you, Mito said after what felt like a lifetime. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out later, okay. A part of her knew this could still all be an illusion, but when her grandmother guided her to the dining room, Tsunade couldn't help but quietly follow. The warmth of the hug was still clouding her mind. When was the last time someone had comforted her like that? It had been a while since the last time she'd let herself lower the walls that were so fiercely built. In a dreamlike state, Tsunade followed Mito along into the dining room. Wood was the primary building block here, and the traditional senju design had been like this long before Hashirama Senju unveiled his Mokuten. Simple and sturdy, built to last. Victory through unyielding determination, as the elders used to put it. Mito led her through the spacious corridors, past the wide-open windows that let natural light bathe the whole house living room. Up the straight staircase, ignoring the many, empty bedrooms, towards the kitchen. In the ceiling, wood panels from various trees crisscrossed, leaving an intricate and strangely beautiful pattern, one of the few traces of extravagance in the entire manor. The house's beauty lies in its simplicity. The floor was built from a much darker wood with a grayish tone to it. One could almost mistake it for stone or marble. Furnishing used to be sparse, one should only have as much as one needs. More have been added in recent years, though, and Tsunade had added even more once she inherited everything. She was a senju, but a few worldly comforts never hurt anyone. Comfort was far from her mind right now, though. Before she could get a better look at the house, she was being sat at the kitchen table. Sounds of clattering pots and pans left the kitchen as Mito prepared their meal. Meanwhile, Tsunade's mind was still too clouded by shock, happiness, disbelief, grief, and a severe tinge of nostalgia to even think clearly. She dimly registered the sound of the stove being turned on and a pan being laid over it, eggshells being cracked, and the sound of a knife chopping on a cutting board. All she had to do was focus on the sounds, and she was suddenly back in her childhood, impatiently waiting for breakfast, eager to go outside and become the great ninja that she was meant to be. Everything felt so real. She was brought back to reality by the smell of chocolate, followed by a soft clink of something being placed on the table. Her Ba-chan's hot chocolate was in front of her, the treat she would always make when she was feeling down. Don't wait for it to go cold. A shout rang from the kitchen, prompting Tsunade to take the cup into her hands. The warmth of the cup grounding her to reality. Tentatively, she took a sip and then suppressed a shudder at the sudden warmth running through her body. A second sip, and a third, and soon enough, the cup was empty in her hands. The familiar taste of the hot chocolate only Mito could make lingered perfectly on her tongue. Before she could mourn the empty cup, a plate of delicious-looking egg sandwiches is placed in front of her. Eat up, sunny side up, no soggy yolk, just how you like it. Long past the point of hesitation, Tsunade immediately tore into it. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Mito leaning against the wall with eyes on her, amusement evident on her face. Still, she couldn't be bothered. It had been too long since the last time she was able to indulge the pleasure of her grandma's cooking. With food this good, who cares if this was an illusion? Once she was almost done with her breakfast, she finally felt slightly more like herself again. Mito sat in front of her with a look on her face that Tsunade knew meant business. Start speaking. How do you even begin to explain this? To do that, she'd have to first understand what the hell was going on here. Some kind of powerful vision. Hallucination. Dream. Where to even begin? She found herself lost of words for the second time in this morning, mouth quivering trying to say something, anything. Until Mito took the lead and finally shot a straightforward question. Another attack. Wordlessly, she nodded, hoping it'll put the issue to rest for the time being. If she just got some more time, maybe she'd figure out what has happened. Tsunade's thoughts were interrupted as Mito ran a hand through her hair. She used to do that when she was a little girl, saddened over her parents. It had been so many years since then, but here she was again. Wanna talk about it, Sun-chan? Mito's ability to go from the scariest person in the world to a caring, sweet old lady always amazed her. Tsunade simply shook her head no, and Mito just let out a defeated sigh before telling her to go back to her room and rest. And then she was finally in her room again, alone. After the meal and the talk, she wasn't feeling good exactly, just a bit less panicky. Still, it was progress, and she was going to need a lot of those to figure out where in the hell she was and what the hell was going on. Zoning out again in the gift box that stood on her desk, she gently picked it up and felt it in her hands, the weight, the texture. It's been so many years, but she couldn't help but feel as though she'd last seen it yesterday. She could even remember what the card said. Maybe she was back. With unshaking hands, she grabbed the wrapping paper and deftly pulled it apart. Chapter 3. Inside the box was the plushie he gave her. She remembered thinking it was going to be something awful or perverted like a skimpy bikini. She also remembered how pleasantly surprised she was to see a cute, stuffed toad with a crown surrounded by her favorite sweets. She smiled fondly at the gift. Tsunade couldn't help but wonder if she thought too little of him at times. Maybe this toad prince is gonna have a better chance to lay in the same bed as you. With love, your idiot. Jiraiya. Yeah, her expectations were just where she needed them to be. She brought the toad up to her face and looked into its black, fathomless eyes. It stared back silently, its perpetual, stitched-on smile almost mocking her. How many years had it been? The thought rang in her head for a few moments before she rushed to the mirror near the study table. For anyone else, traveling back in time would mean a massive difference in looks. For Tsunade, though, things more or less looked the same. The same face stared back at her from the mirror, framed by an untidy mess of the same pale blonde hair. It was the same face that had been staring back at her for the past 3 decades. Despite its similarities, this face was less weary. The most obvious difference was her forehead, which was absent of her Byakugo seal. Well, that does leave quite the age window. Fortunately for her, there was another way for her to reduce that window. Lowering her eyes, she detailed hers. Yeah, she still had those mounds that made her famous among the Konoha male population. Even some of the female population revered her for them. Judging by their size, her age could be anywhere between 15 and 20. Am I really going along with this? Logically, this could be anything from a genjutsu to a hallucination, but here she was, the Godime Hokage of Konohagakure, not to mention one of the strongest kunoichi in the world, standing in front of the mirror, groping hers to tell the time. It was outlandish, to say the least. More ridiculous than even Jiraiya's shitty books. Absent-mindedly, she caught sight of the cute toad plushie in the mirror. But it was hard to dismiss this all. Not when everything was so real and genuine. From her grandma's food, to the house and even that dumb frog. As someone who drank more than just a little bit, she was familiar with the feeling of walking around while not sure where in the hell she was going or if anything was real. But this definitely felt real. A phantom thought ran through her mind. Anywhere from 15 to 20, he might be alive. The door almost tore off the hinges as Tsunade burst out, the wood of the floor creaking with the sudden force. Stopping outside the door of the room neighboring hers, Tsunade took a deep breath before turning the door handle. She prayed she arrived in time. The room was neat and tidy, almost eerily so. It looked as if it had never been lived in, which told her everything she needed to know. She had to be at least 17. For a brief moment, the unfairness of it all felt so overwhelming that she almost felt like laughing. Even when she somehow traveled back in time, her shit luck stopped her from actually saving him. She squashed the urge to slam the door, carefully shutting it behind her instead. She didn't want to feel Mito's anger again over door slamming on top of all this. Even after decades spent dealing with grief, it still stung. She really felt like punching one of the Senju forest trees right now. She pushed those feelings down. She was an adult now, which meant she had to keep her emotions and reactions in check. Once upon a time, she could get angry, punch, and kick, and her parents and grandparents would fix everything. Things were different now. They had been different for a long time. Steeling herself with a deep breath, she entered the room once again. Naoki's room was clean and neat, much more so than it had been when he was alive. His clothes weren't strewn about, the bed was made, and the books were neatly stacked on the shelf. The action figures, as he so furiously called his dolls, were all placed on top of the desk, the same one that never seemed to be organized. The image of Naoki jumping on his bed at age 8 was etched into her kid had energy for ages. Slowly, she walked over to his desk and crouched down, inspecting those so-called action figures. Tiny ninjas stood on the desk, striking various action poses. She especially remembered the time they gave him the Hashirama figure. That toy wouldn't leave Naoki's hands for at least a year after that. He was so excited about becoming a ninja as strong and respected as their grandfather. She turned away from the row of tiny ninjas and knelt in front of the bed. With her superhuman strength, she easily lifted the bed up with one hand and examined one of the bed's wooden panels that looked a lot like one of the many ninja tricks she had learned in her early teens. Their grandmother was quite strict about food in the bedroom, as well as some other things. So, she and Naoki had to resort to some cunning measures to protect some of the precious belongings. Precious belongings usually meaning chocolate, toys, Uncle Tobarama's scrolls, or a pair of magazines slid from between the wooden panels and fell on her lap. The covers displaying women in different states of undress. It wasn't hard to guess who could be behind that one. There was no lack of perverts in Konoha, but only one would be this brazen. A tick mark appeared on her forehead. Jiraiya. Her thoughts of bloody revenge were interrupted when something else slid down and landed on the ground. A hat, but not just any hat. A red cage hat with the fire kanji prominently drawn in the front. She'd seen and worn a similar one many times during her reign. This one, though, was special. Memories of Naoki doing poses with it, shouting things about how Naoki the amazing Hokage would save the day in front of her bedroom mirror dissolved her anger. She ran her hand over the velvety fabric of the hat, still not worn out even after all this time. He must have taken especially good care of it. How long has it been since she paid her respects to him? His grave, his room, this house, and even this hat, were all lost when Konoha was after she spent a good time in coma, just to wake up with little time to prepare for a war. But that hasn't happened yet, now has it? At least if her theory was correct. And that meant, suddenly, she was on her feet with her heart beating in her throat. She needed to go outside and see for herself. After leaving a written note on the fridge to Mito saying she would be back soon, she left the house. The same pathway that led the way from the Senju Gardens to the entrance of the compound covered in acacia trees formed a beautiful, natural arch that covered the path. The whole Senju compound was densely forested, one that rivaled even the forest surrounding Konohagakure itself, so it was often called the Senju forest rather than compound. Massive trees of different kinds stood strong, and their foliage wove together so tightly that only scattered beams of light reached the ground. And even that ground was treacherous to those who weren't familiar with the place. Giving way to ponds, marshes, and even a few cenotes, people had to be careful while walking in the dark. Of course, the farther one ventured from the lights of the mansions and houses, the more dangerous the forest became, and the louder the calls of many species of insects and birds that inhabited it grew. Some of the trees around the mansion had lanterns fixed into their lower branches, unthinkable in the old war times, when security was paramount. Once the village was formed, the attitudes changed, which meant people no longer felt the need to shroud their houses in darkness. Tsunade walked across the compound with a slow practiced ease. The trees became smaller, and the foliage thinned until something could be seen ahead in the distance. She could immediately make out the pale gate of the Senju compound, standing in stark contrast to the darkness of the forest. The massive beams stood on each side, connected by an intricate roof, built from a much darker wood with reddish highlights. Flags with the Senju crest adorned the entrance, flying against the gentle wind. They made it clear which clan these lands belonged to. A symbol of a Vajra against a white field adorned the banners. The clan with 1,000 skills. The cacophony of birds, insects, and who knows what else quieted as Tsunade reached the gate at the end of the hilled pathway. One final ring of tall oak trees near the gate was the last thing separating the tranquility of the compound from Konoha's busy streets. The view greeting her was something she never thought to ever see again. It was Konoha the same way she remembered from her early childhood and teenagehood. Between the attack of the Nine Tails and Pain's destruction, Konoha had changed a considerable amount. Or, at least, the distribution changed. The streets were planned more carefully rather than the ones that were made on the go as the village population grew and grew with time. She knew a lot about that since she had to spend a long time looking at those maps before giving the approval for construction. Fucking paperwork. She was essentially on autopilot as she found herself marveling at the view of a Konoha that only lived on her memories. Well, at least it used to. The old Konoha was a mess in the best way possible. Houses were laid out haphazardly, often stacked on top of each other. Entire neighborhoods were built in layers. Massive trees poked out between the houses, all of them built around the vegetation. This was the Konoha of her childhood. And even with all the chaos she could only smile, those were the streets she knew like the back of her hand. Over the years, it would slowly boom into a proper metropolis, helped by Konoha's beneficial position at the end of the Second Great Ninja War. Despite all that growth, the village definitely lost something along the way, the sense of wonder and hope that came with the dawning of a new era, the excitement of a new way of living, almost blissfully ignorant of what lay before. Back when it felt like this was the first step for a generation of children that could grow up like the kids they were supposed to be, not trained soldiers to be thrown into the front line. There was a constant feeling that peace, true peace, was achievable someday. Civilians felt genuinely safe in their village. The first war had come and gone, but one war wasn't enough to break the spirit of Konoha. People still wholeheartedly believed in the will of fire, and those leeches masquerading as politicians hadn't managed to bastardize it to serve their own needs. Clans weren't at each other's throats, trying to solidify their political standings. And of course, the Akatsuki hadn't begun to work against the villages. Were those kids even alive yet? She shook herself out of her reminiscing when she saw a familiar mop of white spiky hair. Between his tall frame, rather striking hair color, and everything else, he always did stick out from the crowd. Her heart raced as her breath hitched. Her eyes couldn't believe what she was seeing. For such a long time, her mind had been stuck on that day. That scene on the bench, the sunset as he walked away. Her mind incessantly replayed it over and over again, the last moments before he slipped away. She had known. Deep down, she had known, but she still let herself believe like a stupid child that he'd keep his promises. And there he was, back again like he promised he'd be. She was so damn mad at him, and yet all she wanted to do was cry for the umpteenth time today, hug him and tell him he was an idiot. To hold him in her hands, feel him breathe, convince herself that he was real and alive, and to never let him go ever again. She had to convince herself to keep living for the sake of the village back then. But right now, everything was so hazy and confusing, and she was probably in the past. She almost felt like a child, the only thing on her mind being the desire to tell that moron that she loved him more than anything. During her frantic inner monologue, Jiraiya must have spotted her too, since he was getting closer with his characteristic mile-wide smile adorning his face. Her body moved on its own as she ran to be closer to him. Before she knew it, they collided, and suddenly, his warmth was all around her as he held her close, and she could happily drown in it. "Hi," said Tsunade, meeting his eyes once she took her face off his chest. "I'm gonna have to start doing more dangerous missions if you're gonna greet me like that afterwards, Harem." His pupils were blown wide and a blush covered his face, and the smile he held before was replaced by a smaller, more genuine one. It was a smile full of nothing but pure adoration. "Don't joke about that, Baka." She let out a light-hearted laugh before crushing him in a hug once again. He was alive. Chapter 4. Tsunade held him for a few seconds, maybe more, reveling in his warmth. After what felt like a lifetime, he was finally back, and she'd be damned if she let him go that easily. "As much as I don't want this to ever end, I've got important business with the old man, see." Jiraiya waved a thick folder in her face. If even Jiraiya was doing paperwork on time, then it must be something extremely important. She wordlessly plucked it out of his hands and opened up the first page. The words, S rank, immediately caught her eye. She snapped the folder shut, stashing it away from prying eyes. "Hey, that's an important secret village business, Harem," Jiraiya called out, stating the obvious. Tsunade recognized the expression, that mischief in his eyes. It was a sign that he was up to something that might lead to him getting punched. And sure enough, before Tsunade could do anything, he quickly reached out and took the hat she had been carrying. "Very mature." Tsunade snorted, but Jiraiya ignored her, focused completely on the hat instead. Right now, he'd brought the hat up to his eye level, studying the thing with the air of a scientist in his lab. He'd probably realized by now that it wasn't a mere copy. And then with a grin, he placed it on top of his head. "So, what'd think?" At first she paid little attention to the hat, and instead took a good look at his face. He looked so young. The markings on his face were barely reaching halfway through his cheeks, and his wild mane was a bit shorter and more controlled. On the whole, there was still a bit of boyishness about his features. And if she had been a little bit more careful detailing him the second she first saw him, she would have noticed that he was also an inch or two shorter. But even so, it felt like the same Jiraiya that she'd known all her life. On his head, the Hokage's hat looked a fair bit smaller than it should, and his messy hair made it tilt to the side. "Yeah, not even the Hokage hat makes you look less dumb," she finally said, shooting him a smile. "You hurt my feelings, Harem," he replied with mock anger, taking off the hat. It was better that way. Jiraiya was many things but definitely not a Hokage. She couldn't even imagine how badly he'd chafe in that position. As she was lost in thought, he placed the hat on her head in one smooth movement. Well, it's not my style, anyway. The Hokage hat did always look best on a senju. He took a step back to get a better view of her. See, perfect for a warrior princess. Was Jiraiya always like that? She most of the time had been annoyed by his antics, but maybe she missed those little sweet things that he always seemed to do and say. Her younger self would have told him to stop messing about or maybe even lightly whacked him. But now, it just felt nice. Tsunade had to stifle a smile as she took the hat off her head. What are you doing with that anyways? Jiraiya asked. Suddenly, she remembered why she left the house in the first place, and her hands reflexively tightened around the hat. Something must have changed on her face because Jiraiya was now looking at her with concern. For a fleeting moment, she pondered on telling him where she was going, but time was of the essence. Plus, he definitely had enough on his plate right now. Before you go, thanks for the toad, I loved it. She shoved his folder back at him, quickly changing the subject before he could even ask a question. Now go, Sarutobi-sensei must be waiting for the feedback of this mission. Harem, you were supposed to open it on your birthday. A look of incredulous shock came over Jiraiya's face. It's a birthday gift, it's in the name. Shouldn't have given it to me early then. She stuck her tongue out at him. It was so easy to fall into their old dynamics, wasn't it? The white-haired man snorted. Once I finish reporting to the old man, you're gonna see, Harem. The second he left, Tsunade turned away from him and forced herself to not look back. Looking at him leaving the same way he did last time would only bring back bad memories. He wasn't leaving for a dangerous mission this time. Just a meeting with the Hokage. Nothing will happen. Still, she couldn't help the bitter taste it left in her mouth. She pushed those thoughts down. She had places to go and important business to attend to. She took a deep breath and repeated it in her head. Nothing will happen. Tsunade started walking, but her first 2 steps wobbled, a part of her mind still overwhelmed by the newfound emotion. She steadied herself with the 3rd and 4th steps, and by the 5th, she felt just a bit more grounded. And her head was just a bit clearer. And before she knew it, Tsunade was confidently walking across Konoha, only her destination in her. If she had only stayed a few more seconds, she would have seen a torn-looking Jiraiya stare at her retreating figure from the distance. After walking the whole way to the outskirts of the village, she was greeted by a massive torii looming ominously over her head. In front of her was the Konoha cemetery, thankfully empty of any visitors. It wasn't anything grand, like the graveyards in some of the other villages and towns. Just a lot of plain and undecorated graves, equidistant from one another. The whole thing was surrounded by a similarly plain wooden wall. On the outside of the wall, a line of massive trees ran alongside the perimeter, almost as if they were watching guard. Taking the first step, it was as if she'd suddenly stepped into another world. Tsunade felt a chill run down her spine despite the afternoon sun, and the air suddenly felt a lot colder. Listening closely, she could barely make out the hustle and bustle of the village now. Tsunade had always hated the energies places like this held, but she needed to let it all out. It was the least Naoki deserved. She traipsed along the path, seeing stones that held only names and dates, a lot less than she remembered seeing. Still, the rows and rows of cold, gray stone and the silence that they held reminded her of what kind of world they lived in. Just how many people had this world eaten? How many children like Naoki? And how many more will be added in the oncoming wars? It took all of her willpower to not linger and study the graves, to try to figure out who she'd failed to save so far. She'd sink under that weight. And right now, there was just one grave she needed to see. At the far end of the cemetery, a red statue in the shape of a flame sat on an elevated platform. Under the afternoon sun, the flame almost felt like it was glowing. The kanji for Hokage, engraved on the tablet in front of it, shone proudly. On either side of the platform, Tsunade saw a familiar set of stone stairs. They led up the platform, around the statue, and towards a hidden entrance that only a few people knew about. Her gaze lingered on the statue for just a second before she forced herself to continue onward. Quickly climbing the stairs going past the statue, she found the small door built into the wall of the cemetery. On the outside, it looked like an abandoned entrance, but it was actually a door to a Senju shrine, the place to worship gods she had long since stopped believing in. Opening the door, she was greeted by a familiar dirt path decorated by lots of massive trees. It gave the impression that you were roaming inside the forest that surrounded Konoha. The air was pleasantly cool as she neared the shrine, a far cry from the oppressive chill of the cemetery. This was not quite home, but very close. Where all the Senju rest, their days of serving or sacrificing now long gone. The torii at the shrine entrance was much smaller than the one on the cemetery. In its age, the wood had darkened, and moss had made its home along the two pillars. Said pillars more closely resembled tree trunks, by now. The shrine had been part of the Senju since the early days of the Warring States era, long before Hashirama Senju was even born. The years on it were more evident than she ever remembered. In fact, nature had taken back most of the structures around here. Ferns and wildflowers peeked out from between the cracks on the stone staircase, and the remaining statues were almost unrecognizable from the nature reclaim. Her clan preferred it that way, and so did Tsunade, if she had to be honest. The plants breathed a certain life into the shrine that was lost in the village cemetery. The Senju always believed in surrounding themselves with life. Death was an anathema to all that the Senju held dear, so all their customs were founded on keeping themselves as far away from death as they could. It could be seen in small rituals they had. Many of the clan's rituals had been lost through the generations, but they never forgot to keep life and death separate. True to form, the graveyard was on the farthest corner from the Senju. As Senju encountered a dead tree or plant, it was customary to weed it out and plant twice as many in its place. They also believed their homes were the best place to bring their children to the world, since a child drawing their first breaths in a place where sickness and death occurred was unthinkable. Life and death both had their place in the world, but according to the Senju philosophy they were never to be mixed. Once their time comes, they would have an eternity with death. As such, they should cherish their ephemeral dance with life when they had the chance. The Senju weren't the fanciest people, that was a reality that extended also to their graves, which were little more than simple stones. The ones before the Senju Uchiha pact sported the clan crest and the names of the fallen warriors. The newer ones sported the leaf symbol, those had both the name and the date of birth and death of the person. As she walked down the path, she passed by various older graves with familiar names that stuck out. Tuka, Itama, Kawarama, Butsuma. People she never met, but heard endless stories about. Stories so vivid that she felt like she knew them all. She couldn't stop and look at them. Right now, Tsunade had only one destination in mind. After a few minutes of searching, she found what she was looking for. His grave stood out because it was the only one that wasn't covered in layers upon layers of surface grime or had wild plants growing on it. Qian Shou Sheng Shu. Senju Nawaki. Ba Yu Shiri. Cold, hard stone bore the name that she'd been looking for. Tsunade stared at the engraving as she sank to her knees on the soft grass. Passing her fingers over the engraving of his name, she noticed a few burnt candles and incense next to it. Judging by the scent of the incense, they must have been put there by her grandmother. Moving the candles and the incense tray carefully to the side, she laid the Hokage hat as she settled herself in a lotus position. For a while, she sat there, looking for the right words to start a one-sided conversation. What was she supposed to say here? That she was sorry for letting him die. Those were just words. Empty words that didn't change anything. So she settled for the same way she always greeted him. Hey, Squirt. She patted the hat to her side. I don't even know what I'm doing, but I thought you'd like this here with you. She let out a heavy breath. Well, that was one sentence out. Hopefully it would be easier from here. And you shouldn't keep a gift like this with all those magazines, you know. It was a pain to get this hat for you. Did I ever tell you how I got it? She asked, as if he would answer. I stole it from Sarutobi-sensei. Jiraiya helped me out. She let out a laugh as the memory played in her mind. You wanted to be a Hokage so much, I just thought you deserved a real cage hat. Sensei. Jiraiya yelled after kicking open the door to the Hokage's office. Hiruzen Sarutobi looked up from his mound of paperwork as his excited student sauntered into the room. Jiraiya, the Hokage acknowledged, please tell me this is important and you're not just wasting my time. Both of them knew that underneath the stern demeanor, Sarutobi was looking for an excuse to not have to work. Oh, trust me. It's super important. Jiraiya made a show of checking all parts of the room, as if to make sure they were alone. It's about my new report. Your new report. No, I meant my. Jiraiya paused to give him an exaggerated wink before lowering his voice. New report. Your new report. Yes, my new report, Jiraiya confirmed, nodding sagely. A not so insignificant distance away, Tsunade cursed her fate at having to hear those two in her team. Well, in that case, it's a matter of utmost urgency. Was he seriously saying that over reading a smutty rom-com novel? Placing the hat on the desk, he quickly strode towards the door. Behind him, Jiraiya followed, stifling his giggles as he closed the door. Seconds later, Tsunade shot through the window, left open by Jiraiya, and landed expertly on the floor. The Anbu guards had followed the Hokage, and the remaining guards outside were being kept busy with some bureaucratic nonsense cooked up by Orochimaru. That left a moment of opportunity, one that Tsunade seized without a second thought. Tsunade quickly swiped the hat from the desk, making sure to leave anything else untouched. She then escaped with her bounty, shooting through the window the same way she came in. Later on she stood in the entrance of the Ninja Academy waiting for Naoki to come out. Today was the day he was officially going to be made a genin. Well, he still needed to pass his practical test, but he didn't need to know that part. Her wait was over when an overly excited Naoki came out of the building shouting, with happy tears he would argue weren't there in his eyes. The forehead protector clutched in his hand said all she needed to know. "Nei-chan, I made it. I am a real ninja now. See, I told you were gonna pass. You weren't one of the best only because of your cute face." "I'm not cute, I'm amazing." "You're cute and amazing. Now hurry up, Grandma made lunch. All your favorites, Mr. Real Ninja." Tsunade ruffled his hair, and you know how she gets when we're late for lunch. A shiver ran down both Tsunade and Naoki's spine just thinking of their grandma's legendary fury. After arriving home, they saw that Mito had prepared enough food for an army. Naoki's eyes instinctively drifted to the sweets, especially those little red guava and coconut balls that Mito only made for special occasions. He eagerly reached out towards the sweets, before a glare from Mito stopped him on the spot. "Do you think I am going to let you eat those while the rest of the meal is untouched?" Mito scolded. Despite the harsh tone, Tsunade noticed an undercurrent of amusement in her voice. After all, Mito was in a good mood. Signaling the dishes that laid across the table. Fried plantain, meat and potato salad, generous servings of rice, dango, and some fish stew as well. Naoki eyed the rest of the dinner table, clearly torn between the coconut sweets, and his other favorites. Suddenly, Mito decided to make the decision for him and pulled out a bowl from behind her back. Naoki's face instantly brightened again upon seeing the bowl containing his all-time favorite, tempura shrimps with noodles. "Thanks Grandma, you're the best," he said before stuffing his mouth as if he had never eaten before. "Where are your manners, young man?" Mito reminded, her tone a fair bit less harsh than it usually was. "You are now a fully grown genin." Naoki mumbled out an apology through a mouthful of food. Leaving her place behind the counter, Mito then walked to Naoki's side, before wrapping him in a massive hug. "I'm so proud of you, my little lynx." "Grandma," Naoki whined, "I'm not a lynx, okay, I'm a ninja." "A real ninja." He pointed at the headband that now rested in his forehead. "A real ninja, huh?" Tsunade thought, looking at the boy trying and failing to wriggle out of the hug. She couldn't help but laugh. Once the celebrations were over, and the food-induced coma had worn off, Tsunade called Naoki to her room. The latter suppressed a yawn as he entered, his new and shiny forehead protector still wrapped tightly on his head. "Look alive, squirt," Tsunade called out, "it's time for your gift." Naoki immediately perked up, all signs of sleepiness disappearing from his face. "Close your eyes and don't cheat." Almost on cue, Naoki put his hands over his eyes. She gingerly placed the too large hat on his head and guided him to the mirror. "Now open them." The hat was definitely too big on his 9-year-old head. The cloth that surrounded it made its way past his shoulders all the way through his chest, and it looked like a massive beach hat on him rather than a cage hat. "Is this?" Complete disbelief was evident in his voice. Tsunade gave him a slight nod that confirmed his suspicions. "Nei-chan, this is perfect, I love it." He was literally jumping for joy in that moment, tackling her in a hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Naoki continued babbling until he ran out of breath. Tsunade couldn't help but smile at the look on his face. That look of ultimate awe just made everything worth it. He was so happy about it. Tsunade sat there with her mind lost in a haze of old memories as the sun slowly inched towards the horizon behind her. The silence of the shrine was broken only by the wind rustling through the trees. Those were good times. Naoki was still alive, and her team were still free to be kids, not torn apart by war and heartbreak yet. Back then, Tsunade felt like it would last forever. She wished she could stay in those memories forever, where everyone was alive and nothing hurt. But that would just be living with her head in the clouds. Sooner or later, she'd fall and hit the ground. And that was the reality. The cold, hard reality that Naoki was dead and buried under this ground. Taken from the world far, far too soon because of an insane political conflict. No heroism, no nobility, just the corpse of a child. And that reality was what made Tsunade turn to alcohol and gambling the first time around. Trying to find cheap thrills that made existing bearable again. Anything that made her feel something aside from the pain and void of grief. She still remembered that moment when she decided to leave the village. Drowning in a haze of alcohol, grief, exhaustion and God knows what else. Filled with disgust at herself, and the people around her. Wondering if that was really it. Tsunade brought a hand up and wiped her eyes, accidentally smudging a bit of dirt on her face. I'm sorry. Her words were soft, almost lost between the sound of the wind. I should have come sooner, should have stopped you from going on that mission, should have. She felt a shudder rack her body, almost making her double over. From deep inside her, she felt an urge to lash out. Drive her fist into the ground with all her strength, turn the holding place into a crater. For a few long seconds, she just sat there, all her muscles tensed, hunched over and holding her breath. Far into the distance, she could make out some birds chirping incessantly. She was still here, still in the graveyard. Slowly, she released her breath and one by one, loosened her muscles. I should have done a lot of things, she continued, feeling less emotional but a lot more tired now, but I didn't. And now I'm somehow back but I'm still too late. There's no changing it, but. Tsunade thought of a boy that looked and acted so much like Naoki. But there's still the future. Still so much to come, you wouldn't even believe me if I told you. Tsunade let out something that sounded similar to a chuckle. And I still have time now. Time to save others, to stop disasters. I couldn't give you a better life and I'm sorry. All I can do is try to keep your dream alive. To make this village as great as you'd have made it. Sure, she was still cold, tired, afraid, and sad, but at the same time, there was something else. Something Tsunade hadn't felt since the day she went against Madara, nothing to lose and everything to win. At that moment, she felt that same drive, and even then there was another thing. What she felt was a fire running through her body. I'm changing this rotten world for you, kid. I'll make sure no other child has to suffer the same fate as you. Slowly, Tsunade got up from her position on the ground. Giving one last look to the grave, she spoke, one day, long into the future, I'll return to you and you'll be proud of me. And that's a promise. Chapter 5. If you ask Jiraiya what hell felt like, at this moment, he would tell you it felt like sitting in an uncomfortable chair and explaining the last 3 months of your life to his sensei. Writing a report over an S-ranked mission was enough of a chore. Having to verbally deliver said report was another matter entirely. It didn't help that he knew he should be somewhere else. Normally, successful mission reports were short, sweet and to the point. However, Jiraiya's recent mission to Suna was only a success on technicality. So there he sat, going over the specifics of his so-called reconnaissance mission to the Land of Wind. Behind his desk, Sarutobi laid down the written report, a loud breath leaving his mouth as he finished reading it. So you're telling me he's dead? Jiraiya sharply interrupted his teacher. And before you ask, he added, I am completely sure. Even examined that bastard's corpse. He shuddered at the less than pleasant memory. Sarutobi said nothing for a few long seconds before taking a long drag from his pipe. Jiraiya watched as he slowly moved towards the window before letting out another plume. He smelled pretty bad, you know. Jiraiya continued, trying to fill the silence. He was known for being blunt and brash, and normally would be able to keep said bluntness under control, but today his patience was wearing thin. The Hokage stared out the window for another long moment before speaking. So it's starting already, huh? The second cage, dead. It's been a long time coming, it's been incident after incident. The truce we've enjoyed for the last 5 years was fragile at best, and killing a village cage is the last straw, said Orochimaru in his characteristic uninterested fashion. Well, I didn't do it, if that's what you're wondering. Jiraiya made a show of shrugging. From the corner of the room, he heard Orochimaru snort in amusement. As much as he pretended to be a stick in the mud, Jiraiya knew he secretly enjoyed his jokes. What's the reaction like in Suna? Sarutobi asked, ignoring his last statement. Shaman's tribe is calling for blood. Jiraiya answered. The general public is under the impression that Iwa is responsible. Sarutobi simply hummed in response. Considering the wounds and how precise the job was, though, it's been locker room gossip that it was an inside job. And what do you think? Sarutobi prompted. Well, something that's pretty clear in Suna is that the people inside the village are as different as the colors of the sand in the desert. The village is the newest one, and they run themselves as tribes rather than a unit. And the word on the street is, Jiraiya continued, many of the tribes weren't happy with how things were being run. Also, if it was Iwa, they'd blow half the village up as well. No such thing as too much force when a cage is involved, you know. Added Jiraiya, trying to lighten the mood. But would any of the tribes dare go against a cage? Orochimaru interjected, still slouching in the corner. This was a question that Jiraiya had asked himself many times during his mission in Suna. Fortunately, he had found the answer as well. Most of them wouldn't outwardly say anything, but there's one, though. They were always nemesis with Shaman's tribe, even before Suna was founded. And if they saw a chance to blame Iwa, they'd take it, Sarutobi replied. I know of that tribe. Strong, skilled, and above all, foolhardy. Even then, Jiraiya responded, staging something like that in the middle of a tense piece is a stupid move. They're launching their whole village into the front lines again. They really don't care about it, they don't see themselves as a village. Sarutobi answered dejectedly. As long as their own kind survives, they see it as justified purging. The worst part was that none of the people in the room were surprised at the turn of events. As cynical as it was, they were all expecting things to devolve into this at one point. If they've already decided to blame Iwa, then it might be too late now. Suna is far too stubborn. Sarutobi continued, any idea who will be taking up the mantle now? Well, they've got some powerful ninja over there, Jiraiya answered, but the problem is that they're mostly pretty young, so they don't have the respect of the people or the council. That doesn't leave a lot of options. So someone who's strong and experienced with war, huh? The Hokage muttered, one face comes to mind right now. Chiyo of the honored siblings, Jiraiya posed. That old hag with her toys. Orochimaru scoffed. Does that really fit the stature of a cage? Well, she's still alive and highly respected. Crossed paths with her once in the village, and people regardless of their tribe seemed to hold her in high esteem. That sounds like her, Sarutobi added before turning to face Orochimaru. And don't dismiss her puppets as mere toys. I taught you better than this. I know from experience that she's very dangerous, far more than she lets on. Orochimaru said nothing, criticism just sliding off him like it usually seemed to. But they all knew that he got the message now, don't underestimate her. Many had learned that lesson the hard way. Besides, anyone who's given Hanzo of the Salamander a good fight is more than worthy of the hat, the Hokage added. Of course, Orochimaru replied, not seeming impressed in the slightest. And if that's the end of the report, I'll take my leave. Jiraiya watched as his friend quietly exited the room without waiting for a reply. A part of him wanted to speak out, ask him to meet up for training or food later, but not tonight. He had other things to do. I know I brought some bad news, but he's even sulkier than usual. Jiraiya muttered, turning to the Hokage. What's up with that? If you can't see it, then it's not my job to tell you, Sarutobi dismissed. I'm not your teacher anymore, and you're adults. Go and ask him if you want to know. Like he'll tell me, Jiraiya thought. But still, he had to try, so he made a quick mental note. Anything else you need from me, sensei? Jiraiya asked. As much as he wanted to be thorough, he had something important to attend to. Sarutobi seemed frozen in time at the moment, pipe in hand and staring out the window at the monument. In that moment, Jiraiya could see his wrinkles, stress marks, gray hairs that were showing through, and baggy pouches under his eyes, far more clearly than he'd ever seen. Sarutobi wasn't a young man anymore, and even looked a bit older than his actual age would suggest. Hirazen's years of service to Konoha were clearly weighing down on him and making him age quicker than other civilians and shinobi. But right now, he just looked far more spent than ever before. Jiraiya felt like he was intruding just by looking. Quickly enough, the moment passed, and Sarutobi turned towards him, looking like his usual self again. "That'll be all." His voice sounded far off, almost resigned. Quickly leaving his spot on the chair, Jiraiya made his way to the window. Taking one swift jump, he was finally free. Right now, the thought of the Hokage, Orochimaru, Suna, or the upcoming war had all left his mind. His only thought was to reach Tsunade as soon as he possibly could. Jiraiya felt the wind roar around him as he ran across the rooftops, away from the Hokage's tower and towards the marketplace where they met earlier. He would never forget when the news of Naoki's death reached Tsunade's ears. He had never seen her so hysterical. That little kid was the light of her life, and it felt like losing him had destroyed her completely. He perfectly remembered those eyes that still haunted him to this day. Up until that point, he had seen Tsunade in almost every emotion in the spectrum. He had seen her anger and felt it too. That time she caught him spying on him still made him shiver. But the look in her eyes that day was something that was etched into his memory. He'd never seen her so lifeless. He'd never seen her eyes carry so much pain and grief. When they met earlier today, he could still see lingering vestiges of her grief. She was doing a better job of hiding it, but to him, it was clear as day. And that worried him beyond. Tsunade had never been the one to keep her emotions to herself. She felt what she felt without any shame and let the whole world know. And there was just something beautiful about it. For him, she always seemed to shine, brighter than anything else. She would smile the brightest, yell the loudest, mope the longest, and love the hardest. And that was what worried him. For someone like her, losing a brother would be hard. Jiraiya just didn't know how she'd handle it, and his mind couldn't help but conjure up the worst-case scenarios. He didn't want to remember how lifeless Tsunade had been for the past few months, but the images kept forming in his mind. Jiraiya suddenly slowed down as he approached the marketplace, before landing with deceptive quietness. There were still plenty of people around, but he couldn't pick out Tsunade from the crowd. A few heads turned towards him, surprised by his sudden appearance, but he ignored them. Instead, he gathered his concentration and stretched all of his senses, desperate to find any trace of her. What wouldn't he give to be a Hyuga or an Inuzuka at this moment? Konohagakure no Sato, 10 months ago. Her door closed, the blinds shut, no light entering the room. Tsunade hadn't gone to the funeral. Instead she locked herself in her bedroom and cried her heart out. Just outside the door, Jiraiya listened in as he leaned against the wall. He tracked the rhythm of her breathing, far too quick for her to be asleep. He wanted to throw open the door and go inside and hug her, tell her to cry it out, that he was gonna be there, and that sometime in the future everything was gonna be alright. But here he was, frozen, too much of a coward to do anything. It was hell. Just sitting there, not being able to do anything to help and just waiting for something to happen and things to magically get better. He was just useless and all he could do was wait for her. Every so often, he heard a small whimper, and he felt his heart drop for a second before a sudden feeling of helplessness passed over him. He was Jiraiya, a ninja, a man of action, but the paper-thin wall between him and Tsunade felt almost impenetrable. Between her breathing, the hard wooden floor under him, and the myriad of sensations in his stomach, a sense of tiredness crept upon him. Laying his head on his arms for a second, closing his eyes. Before he knew it, the world, his aches, his worries all disappeared and he was whisked away. It wasn't until gentle hands softly ruffled his hair that he realized he'd fallen asleep right outside her room. Lifting his head up, he saw Mito with a cup of hot chocolate in between her hands. "Go home, Jira-chan," she pressed the warm cup in between his hands. Gripping the cup, he sat up properly and took a quick glance at the elder Uzumaki. She was still wearing the ceremonial black funeral robes, and her hair was loose instead of in her characteristic buns. A closer look at her face revealed puffy and bloodshot eyes. Mito-sama, there's no need for this. He tried to hand the cup back. Don't worry about me. Jiraiya, don't try to fool me. I can feel you hurting, too, Mito responded, showing her real softer side. And she's doing fine, Mito added before he had the chance to ask. She's still resting. And now it's your turn. Jiraiya finally stood up, his whole body cracking after finally relieving the tension of so many hours in that uncomfortable position. Look at the size of you, Mito commented with some fondness in her voice. Remind me to buy more groceries whenever you're coming over for dinner. Jiraiya instinctively scratched his head in embarrassment. I'm still a growing boy, you know. For a second, their typical greeting made him forget the current situation, and he found himself starting to grin at her. And then the second quickly passed, and so did the feeling. Noticing the quick change in his expression, Mito laid a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Go and rest, kid. You're not doing anyone a favor by putting yourself through this. I know that, I just don't want to leave her alone. And she isn't, I'll be right here. Besides, you can't support her by hurting yourself. How do you think Suna will feel if you continue doing this? He opened his mouth to retort before shutting it with an audible click once his brain managed to process the words. How do you think Suna will feel? With a defeated sigh, he slowly moved away from the wall of Tsunade's room. Mito's expression shifted a tiny bit as she watched him finally leave the position. Jiraiya stood there awkwardly for a second, before finally stepping up towards Mito. Thanks, Ba-chan, he finally said and wrapped Mito in a one-armed hug, careful to avoid spilling the hot chocolate. She returned it with twice the strength. Jiraiya let out a sigh of frustration as Tsunade was nowhere to be found in the market area. As the evening slowly approached, more and more people filled the place, making the search even more difficult. If he had time, he could investigate, find traces of her, and track her down, but time was the one thing he didn't have at the moment. And that left only one way. It was risky, and Pa didn't think he was ready yet, but that risk was nothing right now. Biting his left thumb and smearing a bit of blood in his right palm, he wove through hand seals. Boar, dog, bird, monkey, and ram. Calm down, frog boy. You can just ask for directions. Jiraiya jumped and turned around to see Mito Uzumaki standing right behind him. She was wearing plain white robes, but the way they caught the sunlight almost made it seem like she was glowing. This time, her hair was tied up neatly into two buns, and she had a stoic expression on her face. How did he not manage to sense her? Don't look so surprised, I know a thing or two about sneaking around. I've done my fair share of it, she said in an all too pleased with herself tone. It never ceased to surprise him when he was reminded of the kind of woman Mito truly was. Her polite demeanor always fooled everyone, and he had learned the hard way that the Uzumaki woman had a temper and more than enough strength to back it up. Mito Ba-chan, what are you doing out here? Helping my granddaughter out. Something we have in common, it seems, she responded, before shooting a pointed glance at the blood smeared on his fingers. And don't even think about it. You're not ready for that, I can sense it. As much as I call you frog boy, I doubt you want to turn into one. Jiraiya swallowed a groan of frustration before putting his hands down, wiping the blood in his hands. I need to find her. Now calm down, you aren't thinking straight. I'm calm, said Jiraiya, lying through his teeth. The hell you are. Mito immediately shot his lie down. Remember, I can feel it. Jiraiya tried to take a calming breath, but his heart was thudding like drums. How the hell was he supposed to calm down? In this state, you are not going to help anyone. Mito paused. She's at the graveyard. You know the one. As annoying as that emotion sensor was, the ability was really useful sometimes. Go ahead, you're faster than me, she made a shooing motion with her hand. And the next time, just ask for help instead of rushing alone like an idiot, she punctuated with a slap to the back of his head. The pain that spider-webbed from the back of his skull. Yup, Tsunade had definitely inherited her strength from her grandma. With that, he took a leap in the direction of the graveyard. Jumping over the roofs with practiced movements, every jump faster and with more strength than the one before. Kanahagakure no Sato, 3 months ago. Jiraiya watched with fascination as Mito Uzumaki neatly poured tea out of the kettle and into his cup. He was completely full right now, of course, but she'd already decided to make him tea, and he wasn't going to tell her no. I think that's enough tea, Mito saw. The rest of his words died in his throat as Mito gave him a quick glare. I thought we were past formalities at this point, Jiraiya. But she's just too scary. Even with her express permission, the thought of informally addressing Mito Uzumaki was a scary one. However, Jiraiya was just the brave warrior to tackle this challenge. I think, that's a bit too much tia. Mito Ba-chan. No it isn't, she responded without missing a beat. She filled his cup to the brim, adding some biscuits to the side. So what brings you here this afternoon? Jiraiya immediately felt an uncomfortable knot in his stomach at the question. Quietly, he produced a package from the inside of his robe and placed it on the table. I'm being sent to a mission for the next few months in Suna. He took a sip of tea. You know how the tensions are with them right now, so I just wanted to leave this thing here just in case. Mito took the package in her hands and inspected it without saying a word. It's a birthday present for Tsunade Haim, he hastily added. Mito didn't react to his addendum and continued closely examining the gift. After a few slow seconds, a small smile crossed her face. It better not be a bikini, Jiraiya. Oh definitely not. Jiraiya almost jumped from his seat and hastily denied the accusation. Perhaps a bit too hastily. Not at all. I'd never do something like that, you have my word. Are you saying that you'd refuse to buy her a bikini if she asked? Mito questioned, shaking the package for emphasis. Or do you think she'd look ugly in one? Jiraiya's brain screeched to a halt as he wondered how to respond. Either way felt like a trap, and one wrong move here would leave him dead. His frantic thoughts were interrupted as Mito whacked him on the head with the package. Stop fretting, she ordered. Jiraiya responded with a nervous salute. Wait, what the hell am I doing? Mito just shook her head at his awkwardness. It was only when Mito laughed out loud that he realized he'd fallen victim to one of Mito's jokes. Well, she called them jokes. Jiraiya thought torture was a better descriptor there, but he wouldn't really voice that opinion. I guess being nervous is better than being morbid, she finally said after her laughter subsided. Seriously, kid, your face was everything. She flipped a switch, her tone now serious. Don't even fathom the thought of dying. If you do, you are leaving the door open for it to happen. I'm just trying to be realistic, Jiraiya protested. I mean, you just don't know how a mission can go. Believe me, I know better than anyone what you mean, but just thinking about the possibility strips you of the will of fighting to make it out alive. She put both of her hands on the table and leaned towards him, getting almost uncomfortably close. You don't win battles by thinking about being defeated, she added with no small amount of ferocity, and Jiraiya felt a shiver run down his spine as she continued. And you don't live a good life by constantly expecting to die. There were a few times when Jiraiya felt there was something just wrong with Mito Uzumaki. Well, not exactly wrong, but there was something scary about her in a way that didn't feel right. He'd fought scary people, been in battles, and seen a fair bit himself, but these small moments with Mito dwarfed it all. As if there was something frightening lurking just underneath her skin, ready to burst out at any moment. Jiraiya's thoughts were interrupted as something whacked him across the face once again. OWW. He stumbled backwards, falling off his chair. The hell was that for? If I were an assassin, you'd be dead, Mito replied matter-of-factly. Because you were spacing out in the kitchen instead of answering my questions. Or you could take a misstep in the forest outside, she continued, fall into a pit and get bitten by something venomous and die. Or a shopkeeper sells you poisoned food and the next morning, you shuffle off the mortal coil. Was that supposed to make me feel better? Jiraiya asked, rubbing his cheek. You could die at any moment, even right now, even this very evening. And you sulking about it won't change anything. So don't mourn your death when you are still living. I get it. So you're saying that I should stop worrying too much about dying and go ahead and buy that bikini for her. Of course, some ways of dying are more painful than others, Mito reminded him, cutting his celebrations short. Her face softened. Just make sure to come back alive. Her usual demeanor returned. Also, you shouldn't be giving this gift to me anyways. She is in her room, and Sun-chan is going to be even more pissed at you if you leave without saying goodbye. You're right, Ba-chan. Jiraiya leapt to his feet and gave her a mock salute. "I'll be off then." After Mito's unorthodox pep talk, he now actually felt ready to face Tsunade and blow her away with his amazing gift. With newfound confidence in his step, he stepped on the wooden plank of the staircase. Instead of feeling the familiar thump of his feet against the wood, there was nothing. He had been running so fast he didn't realize the fact that he had run out of roofs to land on until he jumped and landed harshly on the ground. Talk about great ways to stop spacing out, he thought as he dusted himself off before setting off again. As he rushed towards the graveyard, heart thudding so loud he couldn't hear anything else, his mind wandered back to that moment. Konohagakure no Sato, 3 months ago. There he stood, that door. Lately, it has been feeling more like an iron wall rather than a door. He took a deep breath to collect himself. The confidence he felt at the bottom of the stairs was rapidly waning, so he had to do it before it could empty. Right now, knocking lightly 3 times, and there he stood waiting for it to open. He'd had his fair share of action in his life, yet there he was, on the verge of a nervous breakdown because of a damn door. He consciously regulated his breathing to keep his heart from pounding its way out of his chest. But underneath the nervousness, fear, and worry, there was still something else. An eagerness to see his friend, and hope. Just that hope that maybe this time, Tsunade would be closer to her old self. And because of that, he couldn't allow his fear to overtake him. He just couldn't. Just as he brought his hand up to knock again, the door creaked open, revealing a rather disheveled-looking Tsunade. She looked so tired, with bags under her eyes, and a messy head of hair as if she'd been sleeping. "Hey, Harem." The noncommittal grunt wasn't what he wanted to hear in response, but he'd been expecting it. Truth be told, a large chunk of his bravado petered out after seeing that. Mito's words echoed through his mind, "Stop fretting." Undaunted, he continued, "Sensei just gave me this really boring and long mission, so I figured I'd visit you before I left." He was received with a hum until she finally noticed the package he'd been holding. Noticing her glance, he raised the gift in front of him. "What is that?" She spoke in a soft voice. That was a win in his book. "That thing, Harem, is a gift for you. Since this boring mission will hold me up for a bit, I'm just dropping this by in case I miss your birthday." There was a slight shift in her expression. He didn't know what exactly that was, but something changed. Anyway, he maneuvered out of the topic of the mission. "I'm giving this to you in one condition." "Well, actually, make that 2 conditions." Jiraiya added, making a V with his fingers. Tsunade's expressions remained unchanged at his antics. "First, you gotta wait till your birthday to open it," Jiraiya declared. He looked directly into her eyes, trying to find some semblance of emotion, anything to give him even a bit of hope of seeing the old Tsunade that he loved. "The second one is up to you, but," he brought a finger up and pointed at his forehead, "can I get a good luck kiss?" As soon as he entered the graveyard, his eyes were immediately drawn to the statue of a flame. The sun streaked through it, bathing the area in front of it in reddish-orange. And right in front of the statue, there she was. Tsunade. Sitting down on the stairs with her shoulders hunched, staring at the floor. The statue right behind her caught the light of the sun, and bathed her with a slight red. Normally blonde hair looked almost golden. She was slouched and unmoving, her hair forming a sort of curtain that hid her face from the world. Even from a distance, he could tell that she was tired. As he approached her, Jiraiya had 1,000 things running through his mind. It was just like when they first heard the news of Naoki's death. What could you even say in that situation? What use are words? All his words to break ice were stolen. He was almost in a trance as he approached her. So much so that he didn't notice the vase in his path until he knocked it over. The sound of the porcelain shattering snapped him out of his stupor and startled the blonde, whose head immediately snapped towards him. Jiraiya was about to offer a greeting, but his words died in the back of his throat when Tsunade's gaze locked into him. In those eyes, he swore he saw something he thought to be lost. He knew Tsunade was never going to be the same, yet when he saw those eyes, something told him that maybe it wasn't a bad thing. Chapter 6. Tsunade stared at the pale wooden ceiling of her bedroom, almost transfixed by how surreal it all was. The morning sun was barely peeking through the open windows, signaling the start of another day. Her week had started out pretty normal. She bought groceries, ate a late lunch in Ichiraku, drank herself to sleep, and then woke up around 40 years into the past. It's all because of that damn cheap sake. She fumed. A few seconds ticked by and she let out a long breath. At this point, she was starting to get tired of feeling angry at the whole thing. Once the cards are dealt, all you can do is play your best. And she was very familiar with being dealt a shitty set of cards. The first night she thought it might revert back to its original time once she went back to sleep, or when midnight struck. But the morning arrived with the same knocking sound waking her up yet again. After that, it became clear that this was gonna be a more permanent situation. Part of her was waiting for this to revert itself back, knowing her luck. Still, another side of her dreaded it all. All the wars and conflicts to come, and the dangers that awaited her. The next few days passed in the same fashion, every day being woken up by her grandma, being bothered by Jiraiya, training, and so on. Truth be told, she was still waiting for a moment when it all clicked into place and she felt like she belonged. It still felt like she was a ghost walking through her memories. She was taken out of her trance when Mito suddenly knocked on the door. Well, it was less like a knock and more like an angry fist slamming against the wood, almost taking it off its hinges. Here we go again, thought Tsunade as she slowly rolled out of bed, not willing to test her grandma's patience. Can't believe I used to miss this. Mornings in Konoha just had a different feel in this era. Before the village expanded after the Second Shinobi War, everything was smaller and more intimate. Less cramped buildings and more giant trees really made a difference. Tsunade leisurely walked through the streets, in no rush to reach the marketplace. She found her morning walks somewhat meditative, especially since the streets were mostly empty at this time. She had nothing against the people of the village, but it did get tiring to try and wriggle herself around the crowd. Hence why everyone with basic ninja training chooses the rooftops instead. Of course, there was still one disturbance she couldn't get rid of. Predictably enough, a certain someone had figured out her morning routine. A very persistent someone. Tsunade barely finished that thought before she noticed a sudden flash of white from the corner of her eye. You need to improve your stealth if you want to keep following me around. If she wasn't feeling charitable, she'd call it stalking, and some very badly executed stalking at that. She couldn't bring herself to be harsh on him, though. Harem, if I were trying to hide, you wouldn't be able to feel me. I didn't survive in Suna all those months just off my pretty face. If saying that soothes your ego, then go ahead. Tsunade responded without a pause. He probably wasn't trying too hard, but she'll be damned if she admitted it. Come on, Harem, Jiraiya complained, falling into a step beside her. It won't kill you to give me some credit, you know. I'll give you all the credit you want once you figure out how to stop being a creep. But I am a super pervert, Harem, not some mere creep, said Jiraiya, almost genuinely hurt at the underestimation of his debauchery. And some things can't be changed. Tsunade ignored his bragging and looked up at the three faces on the Hokage monument. Under the morning sun, they had a golden gleam to them with the mid-morning sun. You seem pretty contemplative lately, Harem, what's up? Well, I have been dealing with a creepy weirdo following me lately. Tsunade responded, hiding a smile. Lately? Jiraiya puffed up in indignation, come on, I've been at it for years. Now what's really going on? I don't know. Tsunade vainly gestured, trying to come up with the right words to express her turmoil. Just realizing that things have been changing around here. And I didn't really notice anything. It was hard to phrase her thoughts in a way that made sense to the people. With so many massive shifts happening over the years, Tsunade hadn't paid much attention to those small imperceptible changes all around her. Though they foretold what was coming, she simply hadn't taken the time to notice. Now, the difference was pretty stark. Life had moved on, even when she wasn't noticing it or paying attention. I get it, said Jiraiya, remember that ice cream store that we used to go to after D-rank missions? And that park nearby with that weirdly bent tree. The whole thing is a giant office building now. Damn. Jiraiya's remark was on point, but it couldn't touch the magnitude of what Tsunade was experiencing. They may not have had the best ice cream, but that's still rough. You tell me. Jiraiya responded. I told Oro and he just said the ice cream place deserved to go bankrupt because they were ripping us off with overpriced shitty ice cream. That's Orochimaru, alright, Tsunade muttered, a slight smile tugging at her mouth. Things did change, but some things definitely stayed the same. The pair had finally reached the market. It was still early enough to avoid the crowd, which saved her time and also meant that nobody was around to hear Jiraiya still ranting about ice cream quality. It said, "Sugar-free, Harem." Jiraiya angrily gestured, "But what's the point of eating ice cream if you are not gonna get the sugar high afterwards? If it tasted the same, then what are you crying about?" Tsunade almost felt a headache coming on. Ignoring her angry friend, she approached a fruit stall. After exchanging a quick greeting with the fruit seller, Tsunade started browsing the selection. The price of fruits and vegetables had actually gone down in recent border disputes meant merchants were more wary of trading with other countries. It suited Konoha just fine, since the Land of Fire with its fertile lands produced more than enough to feed its citizens. Instead of helping with the shopping, Jiraiya plucked an apple off the shelf and started eating. "Did you pay for that?" Tsunade asked. "Nah, I'm a shinobi, remember?" Jiraiya tossed the core away, casually. "We're supposed to be scoundrels." The vendor glared daggers at him, which Jiraiya flippantly ignored. Meanwhile, Tsunade had somehow managed to fit all the fruits into the small bag, so she moved to the vegetable stall. "Are you going to steal a cabbage next?" she asked him. "Stealing is an ugly word, Harem. I just rewarded myself for all the hard work I do keeping the village safe." Tsunade gave him a look and he relented. "It's fine, I left the money right in front of him." "If he wasn't too busy ogling at something else, he'd have noticed," said Jiraiya as he lowered his gaze to the something in question. "You're lucky I'm carrying too much fruit to hit you right now. He's the perverted one and it's still me who gets threatened." Jiraiya muttered petulantly. "So unfair." Tsunade was about to kick him before something at the corner of her eye caught her attention. A group of women with dark hair and matching dark robes were making their way through the market. The fan insignia on the back of their robes left no guesses as to which clan they belonged to. The Uchiha were always a numerous clan, but it had been a good time since she had seen them. It was almost surreal to see them all walking around and doing regular things. One day, all these lives were going to be washed away as if they'd never been there. She was brought out of her thoughts when Jiraiya suddenly poked her in the head. Tsunade reflexively kicked out at him and he dodged, clearly anticipating the attack. "It's getting pretty crowded, Harem," Jiraiya said, looking serious for once. "We can return in a bit." Yeah, she muttered, paying little attention to what was being said to her. "Great. I could go for an ice cream right now, come on." As she absent-mindedly followed Jiraiya out of the market, Tsunade couldn't help but feel impotent in front of those women, bitterly contemplating the doomed fate which burdened their powerful clan. After a day of chores, training, and a lot of thinking, Tsunade was lying in her bed, trying to shake off post-dinner lethargy. Her grandmother had already gone to sleep, and the manor seemed especially silent. Struck by a sudden burst of energy, Tsunade rolled across her bed before reaching out to grab a notebook and pen off her study desk. Casually flipping through all the pages, she noticed her old medical notes scribbled all over the pages. There was something uniquely weird about seeing the stuff she now knew by heart laid in those notebooks. The whole thing gave her a weird sense of future nostalgia. How many of these notes would later be published in medical textbooks? Looking at the thin notebook with all the cramped writing and a few doodles here and there, Tsunade found it quite hard to imagine. Of course, there were more than a few errors here and there as well. Medicine was an ever-growing field after all. Finally finding an empty page, she tried to put her thoughts in order. "What do I need to do here?" she asked. As she put her thoughts into writing, a few answers came to mind. Save Konoha. The world. It felt childish when she put it like that, but that really was the answer, to save her village, and the world, from the machinations of the Akatsuki, Madara, and Zetsu. Using a complex cipher, Tsunade noted that down before an uncertainty suddenly welled up inside her. Was she alone even enough to save everyone? Her grandma, Sensei, Jiraiya, Dan, Enji, Yakumo, so many people had slipped through her fingers already. But her cards were dealt and there was nothing she could do but play this round and, for once, hope that luck was on her side. She continued cooking plots in her mind. There were events she needed to stop, players she needed on her side and people she needed to take care of. A few minutes later, she'd filled her page with a basic list of things that needed to be done. And seeing it all written down left her with an unsavory realization. If she wanted to save the world, she would need to become Hokage. She wanted to facepalm herself for ending up in this situation. Tsunade held no love for that position, but there was just no other way to do it. To make the changes she wanted, she needed the power and influence that came with that damned hat. In her past life, she'd spent decades running away from the seat of the Hokage. And here she was plotting how to get it. The irony wasn't lost on her. Next on the list was the whole infinite Tsukuyomi mess. Truth be told, she felt out of her depth regarding that, but she now had the time to nip it in the bud before Zetsu and Madara could start causing damage. But right now, one massive problem was brewing, one that helped forge her identity as a Sannin in the previous life. The last time around, being the sole team that survived the Omegakure massacre had left them with the fame all shinobi secretly wanted. Yet they'd gotten it in the worst way possible, survivors' guilt weighing heavily on their shoulders. Only the three of them knew what had happened that day. No one else understood the bitter taste that came with the title of Sannin. The thought of going through that again was daunting, but judging by Jiraiya's mission report, it might already be too late to stop it. Nonetheless, she made the note: end the second war. Fortunately, Konoha won that one handily the last time around, so there shouldn't be a massive risk of the village failing this time. The thought gave her a small burst of confidence, so she added another note underneath: prevent the next two shinobi wars. If she could manage to end this war correctly, she could easily prevent the third. She always thought of the third as the unfinished business of the second, the last hurrah before they finished traumatizing another fine generation of shinobi. And if she stopped the third one, that meant Obito Uchiha wouldn't end up joining Madara. A huge part of Madara's plans will fall apart right there. Meaning the Kiri massacres and many other disgraces upon the shinobi world would never happen. Tsunade hated the fact Konoha's history was so tangled with world-ending affairs. Nonetheless, she continued. The biggest thorn in her side while being Hokage would be Danzo. One thing that incited her fury the most was when the hat was in her possession and she read all the reports about how oblivious, incompetent, and just plain shameless Sarutobi was. One explanation was that Sarutobi was too sentimental about his old friend, and on some level, she even preferred that excuse. That would make him a mediocre Hokage at best. Otherwise, he was just playing the fool, which led to the worst scenario: that Sarutobi was actually a Machiavellian genius and Danzo was just used as a scapegoat, doing his part by turning a blind eye to all his operations. Still, having the hat would make her plans a lot easier, especially if she managed to get it earlier. Stopping the wars, stopping the infinite Tsukuyomi, and uprooting Danzo. Chuckling to herself, she noted the last part down. A sudden knock at the door prompted her to shut the notebook with a yelp and jump into a sitting position. Half a second later, the door swung open and revealed an irate Mito Uzumaki in her sleeping gown and her hair down. Tsunade quickly shoved the notebook under the blankets, feeling less like a future Hokage and more like a teenager who was caught doing something embarrassing. Sun-chan, stop thinking so loud, the fox won't let me turn off the radar. Alright, I'll get to sleep now. Tsunade responded. You said that hours ago, Mito snorted, and yet here you are, keeping the both of us awake with your fretting. Damn her ability, Tsunade fumed internally. I need to plan and save the world, goddammit. And don't get mad at me, young lady. Said Mito, one more word and I'm taking away your diary. Tsunade wisely shut up after that threat, despite an indignant inner voice protesting against her important notes being called a diary. Noticing her silence, Mito gave her a smug look before finally leaving the room. Well, she really had no choice now. It was impossible to win an argument with that woman. Falling back into her pillows with a soft thud, Tsunade swallowed the scream of frustration that threatened to escape. Saving the world was hard enough, but saving the world as a teenager brought even more complexities. She gained even more respect for Naruto. Closing her eyes, she slowly started counting down from 100. Images of the past and future, both good and bad, faded in and out of her thoughts. Defeats, victories, people she knew, people she lost, her shame, and her glories. The countdown continued and soon enough her breathing evened out. Seconds turned into minutes and then into hours as she fell into a deep sleep. Tsunade didn't know for sure what woke her up. Maybe it was some animal or bird making noise outside, or maybe just her brain. But she did know that she wasn't falling back to sleep anytime soon. She squinted at the clock on the wall for a few seconds, realizing it was 2 a.m. Still far too early to wake up, she sighed, her sleep was definitely gone by then. Not knowing what else to do, Tsunade pushed herself upright and grabbed her notebook once again. She opened the page and read through her list of plans, all of them feeling a bit sillier after receiving a dressing down from her grandmother earlier. Become Hokage, stop the wars, stop Madara, stop Zetsu, form alliances. There was a lot to do. And she definitely couldn't do it all alone. Tsunade needed people she could trust with parts of her plan. Those who would back her as she tried to implement her plans. Picking up the pen, she started jotting down. The first name was easy. Jiraiya, not yet a Sannin but still her teammate. She couldn't bear the thought of sending him to danger, but there were other ways he could help her. Mito Uzumaki was the second name. She needed to be the Hokage and her grandmother's significant political influence would be a massive help. Aside from that, she needed people who could be trusted to have the welfare of the village in mind. Regardless of what Sarutobi thought, they'd all see that Danzo was a leech that needed to be removed. With their help, going against the route would be much easier. For that, she'd need to have a talk with Inaku Yamanaka, the head of the Yamanaka clan and most importantly, her uncle. From what she remembered of the man, he should be canny enough to figure out the threat of the route. All she had to do was point him in the right direction. If she got him to listen, that meant the Nara and the Akamichi clans could also be working with her. Of course, none of this was a guarantee but it could make a good starting point. As she made the note, her mind began to wander and she started to think about the rest of the clans in Konoha. With powerful clans like Hyuga, Aburame, Uchiha, Kurama, and more, Konoha had a collection of strong warriors with impressive bloodline limits. This advantage had been instrumental in the village's survival all these years. If she could get most of these clans to work with her plan, that would both give her a good amount of ninja with amazing abilities and set the backup of all shinobi clans if she needed them to recognize her claim over the hat. She dropped back on the bed with a heavy thud. Easier said than done, though. Tsunade had trouble wrangling these clans when she had the prestige of being a Sannin. And now she was just a teenager. Why can't things be simple? She suppressed the urge to punch her pillow to shreds. All thoughts of violence left her mind in a flash when a shout suddenly rang through the house. Su-chan. It was followed by a loud thump, probably for emphasis. What did I tell you? Quickly shoving the notebook under the mattress, Tsunade threw herself on the bed and pulled the covers on top of her, mentally adding a note to never mess with her grandma's sleep again. The lungs on that woman, she fumed, before forcing her eyes shut. Tackling one of the most important ones of her list, she went to the Yamanaka flower shop. There she found a man in his mid-30s with long blonde hair, crouching behind the counter tending the ever-complicated orchids. My little tiger lily. Every time I see you, you look more and more like your mother. Inaku's voice was tinged with nostalgia. He rose so quickly he had the spray bottle still in hand, giving her a massive hug. Trust a Yamanaka to open a conversation like that, she thought, the mild annoyance overshadowed by the comforting hug from her uncle. His opening comment caught her off guard. She'd almost forgotten how much people used to comment on her mother's resemblance when she was young. As Tsunade grew older, the number of people who still remembered her mother decreased. She couldn't decide if she missed it. At this point, it felt a bit alien. Uncle, she replied, after breaking the hug, you look well, too. Oh no. Inaku finally put the spray bottle down. You're being polite. I guess this is a serious talk. Was she really that easy to read? Very serious, Tsunade replied. There was no use beating around the bush. It has to do with the security of the village. Much more than just this village, but he didn't need to know. Inaku's eyes darted around, surveying for spying eyes. Let me show you something first. Inaku said, stepping away from the counter. A particularly delicate species. She followed him to the back of the shop, only to be greeted by an industrial-looking metal door. From what she remembered of her childhood, this was where they kept the flowers that'd wilt unless in very controlled conditions. Upon entering the room, Tsunade became aware that she had been dressing for a Konoha summer, and not a chat in cold storage. Inaku pulled out a stool and placed it in front of her. Here, have a seat. Be careful to avoid the flowers, though. He pointed out a shelf of some delicate-looking white flowers to her left. Lily of the Valley. Just got them last week. Tsunade didn't consider herself particularly interested in flowers, besides their medicinal uses. She had vague memories of her mother tending the flowers around the manor, telling her the names and how to take care of them. That was about as close she got to the art of flower arranging. Avoiding touching the delicate blooms, she took a seat in front of her uncle. So, Tsunade began, wondering where to start. She was tempted to just confess everything, to share her burden with someone she could trust. But shinobi weren't trustworthy by nature, and Yamanakas did have a tendency towards gossip. One word slipping out could end with her in an interrogation cell, and within Danzo's reach. But she had to start somewhere, even if it's only a part of the whole truth. I need you to keep an eye on something for me, but whatever is said can't leave this room. Tiger Lily, whatever is said in the cooler, stays in the cooler. He smiled, putting his hand over his heart. On my florist's pride. If anyone knows the human mind, it's you, she sighed. How important are emotions to the human mind? Well, that definitely wasn't what I expected, he replied, relaxing into the chair. I guess that depends on your own opinions. You know, what you feel is valuable about life. That was a non-answer if there ever was one. Still, Tsunade wasn't deterred. Come on uncle, I need a more objective point of view about it. Inaku let out a deep sigh, apparently not prepared to explain intricate psychological concepts to a teenager this early in the morning. If I had to make it really simple, he began, staring into the distance. I guess emotions are kinda like automatic responses written into our brains. You know, he added, you touch something hot, you automatically jerk your hand away, now fire scares you. You hear your grandmother's angry voice, you automatically feel fear. Tsunade suppressed an involuntary shudder as a memory of angry Mito Uzumaki popped into her mind. She might be an adult on the inside, but still, her grandmother was scary. Her uncle grinned. And when you feel fear, you know it's time to run away from an angry grandma. Emotions help us survive that way. He clapped his hands together, apparently proud of his explanation. There you go. Tsunade wasn't a fan of the dumbed-down explanation, well aware that he was picking out a convenient version instead of an accurate one. Still, it was a start. So you think emotions are important to us shinobi too? She asked. He nodded. I hear that a lot, you know. People who think being a strong shinobi means giving up our emotions. But between you and me, I've seen the Hokage leer at enough women to say that's not true. Trying to get a straight answer out of her uncle wasn't the easiest thing in the world. He just had a way of giving out a bit of the answer, and then deflecting the question towards something else. And since she was the one who needed his help, she couldn't exactly tell him to be more direct. So what would you say if someone had a plan to train an army of emotionless shinobi? Tsunade probed, gauging Inaku's reaction. First of all, I'd wish them the best of luck. He laughed. It's basically impossible. Emotions are innate, not a switch you can turn on and off whenever convenient. So you think it'd fail? At most, all you can do is teach them to keep it all bottled up and suppress their reactions, he said dismissively. That aside, emotions help us learn, grow, and develop. Just imagine trying to teach a new jutsu to someone that feels no gratification from learning. Without the pleasure and pride that comes from progress, people will stagnate and their potential will be wasted. Although it was something she pretty much knew already, it was still a relief to hear it. I really hope you're not planning on creating an army of emotionless drones. Inaku joked. You should spend that time on something actually useful, like finally learning how to cook. There's the uncle she knows. Tsunade bypassed his last comment. Well, not me, she responded solemnly, struggling to put it into words. But someone is, and I'd like you to keep an eye out for that. If there was anyone who could find a way to track an army of emotionally stunted ninjas, it was the head of the Yamanaka clan. However, there was still one important thing. You can't tell anyone else about this, not even sensei. If Inaku was surprised by her warning, he didn't show it. Of course, he responded without a beat. My cute little niece asking me to watch out for the safety of the village isn't really something that needs to be reported. Despite the joking answer, Tsunade knew that he was serious about keeping quiet. But before she could breathe a sigh of relief, he continued. But, he said, tone slightly more stern now, you also need to promise me that you'll come to me before you do anything reckless. He was obviously worried that she'd get herself in over her head. If she had actually been a teenager, it would have been the right call. Her younger self really wouldn't have been prepared to move against the likes of Danzo. However, things were different this time around. This body might be young, but her mind held more than 50 years of experience. Don't worry, uncle, she smiled. This isn't something a teenager should be dealing with, I know. I'll leave these things to you. I can't tell you more until later. My Lily, you are not a common teenager, you were never a common kid to start with. Tsunade had to smile at that. She always appreciated when Inaku treated her as a young adult rather than a kid, and now in her current situation, it was a breath of fresh air. I'm guessing we can go out now, Inaku said, standing up. This isn't the most comfortable place, I know. Tell me about it, I am freezing. Tsunade muttered, rubbing her hands together. Inaku patted her on the top of the head. Let me fix you some hot tea, your grandma will kill me if you get a cold. How does Jasmine sound? Despite being an adult, Tsunade definitely felt no shame in others pampering her when hot beverages were involved. That sounds amazing. Orochimaru's paw. It didn't take long, from Jiraiya's arrival, to the report that confirmed the truth no one wanted to hear. They had a whole protocol done, they were ready. And that made him sick to his stomach. Farce didn't even begin to describe it. He knew, being Lord Third's right hand for the past few months. It was not a matter of if, but rather when. Instinctively, he took out the small transparent bottle filled with a colorless gel that he always carried with him. He squirted a little of the gel into his hands, carefully making sure to rub between his fingers and under his nails. The acrid smell of alcohol burning his nostrils, he felt safer. You can never be too careful, he thought. Who knows where all these shinobi have been? Satisfied with his routine, Orochimaru summoned his wits and started for the meeting hall. The room was almost full, but not full enough that he couldn't find a quiet corner for himself. Leaning back on the wall, he watched the crowd of Konoha shinobi as everyone waited, Jonin and Chunin alike. He didn't know all of them, most weren't significant enough to be worth knowing. Of course, there were some exceptional shinobi here, the most prominent being Tsukumo Hatake. An irksome character, for sure. Incredible talent and skill, offset by an equally incredible lack of ambition. Predictably enough, his sensei was very fond of him. That man trained hard, completed his missions, and did whatever was asked. In many people's eyes, that'd make for the ideal shinobi, but he knew better. One doesn't become strong just by following a path laid out by others. Orochimaru couldn't help but be disgusted by the waste, although the feeling was tinged with a tad bit of relief. Orochimaru could easily pick out his silver hair from the crowd, standing at the other end of the room. As if sensing his stare, Hatake looked up. Turning away, he went back to scanning the crowd. The usual clan heirs were here, as expected, and none of them worth more than a cursory glance. Orochimaru felt a similar annoyance at the waste of it all. Born with every advantage in the world, all the wealth and knowledge of their ancestors, inherited powers, and all they did was sit in their hovels and play politics. Even calling them shinobi was an insult to the word. The podium sat empty, the esteemed Hokage late as usual. He knew what his sensei was going to say. After all, he had been there when we wrote his speech. Orochimaru knew every point that was going to be touched in this meeting, so long as he stuck to the script. Still, he couldn't let go of the unease that came with the whole event, and that feeling only mounted as a nearby group of newly promoted chunins started chattering loudly. The pitch and volume of their voices seemed to bounce off the floors and all the many bodies in the room, amplified and thrumming against his ear canals like a marching band. Much as he wanted, he couldn't just start wringing their necks right there. After all, they weren't supposed to die until a few months from now, in a ditch somewhere for the glory of the village. Then again, how big of a difference could crushing a few pests make such a short while before their time? His morbid thoughts were interrupted when the chattering stopped, a hush falling over the room. Poking up above the crowd, the Hokage's hat made his way through the room. Orochimaru disagreed with the man on most things, but even he had to admire the ability to silence the room that easily. Finally taking his seat in the elevated panel, Hiruzen Sarutobi turned to the small crowd, leaving his pipe on the table. Below, everyone waited in silence as the Hokage started his address. This, he gestured around the room, is not a celebration. Regrettable, I know, but I am in front of you bearing some troubling news. The cage of Sunagakur has been assassinated. A smattering of gasps rose up at the news. Suna now prepares to march against Iwa in retaliation. When they do, it will be through our land, and the lands of our allies. Towards the north, Kumo sits in wait, looking for any chance to expand their borders. He noticed a few people straighten up in attention at the mention of Kumo. Suna alone was as threatening as a toddler with a knife. The only damage they could do was to themselves. However, Kumo was a proper threat and everyone knew it. We've had border skirmishes in the past, but it seems full-blown hostilities are now imminent. So let me make this clear, this isn't just a minor conflict to be swept under the rug. This is a matter of life and death for Konoha, and all its people. Orochimaru resisted the urge to roll his eyes there. Ever the dramatic, his sensei. He just had to spice it up a bit before reeling them all in. But, he continued, bravely, as shinobi, we are no strangers to death. When we put on that headband, we swore to be the bulwark that protects the village. Now, it is our time. His voice boomed as he continued his speech. Orochimaru already knew it by heart, every word, sentence, comma and period. Nevertheless, he clung to his sensei's every word, just like everyone else. True charisma cannot be ignored. Before us, we have a long and hard journey. We're all going to face many long months full of struggle and of suffering, and I know this will be no easy task. It will be a challenge greater than any you've faced so far. You all are about to embark upon the Second Shinobi World War. The declaration was followed by a few seconds of absolute silence as the enormity of the situation slowly dawned on everyone. Sarutobi let it linger for a moment before continuing. This may come as no surprise to many, as we have been at the verge of war for the longest time. And while we don't know when the real battle might start, measures must be taken for the success of the village. Be vigilant, train harder than you ever have, become strong in body and mind. He paused to take a deep breath. What I am asking of you, is to be the heroes you are destined to be. Let the world know the mighty roar of the shinobi Konohagakure has bred. Protect the freedom of those who have trusted you to protect them. The shift in the environment was palpable. A massive cheer started in the back of the room and soon overtook the whole meeting hall. As the cheers started to die, the only thing that Orochimaru couldn't help but think how foolish they were. Thunderous applause at the prospect of their own demise. Didn't they know they were due an awful death in some faraway land? All for the sake of glory they never were going to live to witness. But it was too late for them. Their minds were already filled with images of a glorious death, as if such a thing existed. He could barely hide the sense of disgust when his eyes crossed with Sarutobi's. That man really just made them desire their death, by promising them the title of heroes, the only thing left for them being their name on a stupid rock. Useless bravado that will soon be extinguished under the bootheels of the enemy. He turned away from the cheering crowd, moving from through it trying to find the nearest exit, taking out once again the plastic bottle from his pocket, letting the transparent gel wash away the feeling of unease. As he left the tower, his only companions were the sound of his footsteps echoing in the hall and distant sounds of cheering. Chapter 7. Tsunade leaned against a tree, trying to keep herself upright even as her legs shook from fatigue beneath her. Training was hard enough already, but she had to deal with two new problems. First was that her body was out of shape. If she was getting so tired this easily, she'd definitely been slacking on her training in the past. Second, she couldn't pull out all of her tricks during training without asking too many annoying questions. Even though she had the strength to destroy mountains with her fists, she had to act like a run-of-the-mill newbie jonin. No need to look so annoyed, Haim. You're crushing yesterday's records. Jiraiya cheerfully called out from his position in the shade. Of course, that didn't do anything to soothe her anger. With war looming in the horizon, she needed to be much better than that. Some of us, actually, like working hard. Tsunade responded in between heavy breaths. Don't be that way, he pouted. I'm under orders to take some time to recover after my mission. And you know me, I never slack off. Tsunade resisted the urge to throw a tree at him. Instead, she took a few more moments to steady her breath before responding. That's not true. You slack off all the time. Remember how often Sensei had to drag you to training. What can I say? We were all young and dumb once. You're slacking off right now. She pointed an accusatory finger at Jiraiya, who was casually lounging on the grass. "We don't get breaks after missions when there's a war." He waved away her accusation. "If it's not officially announced, it doesn't exist." As frustrating as it was, Jiraiya was technically right. You can repeat that line to our enemies once they stab you in the knees. Less talking, more running. Biting back a retort, Tsunade quietly walked back to the training field. There were more important things to focus on than winning this verbal spar. Tsunade was never the fastest, hence why her colossal strength and the ability to shrug off damage became her best friends in the battlefield. As a result, she never really needed to be the fastest one out there. With just a precise punch, most of her enemies were as good as done. And for the rest, she had her teammates. But this time was different. Now that she had her tricks from the future down, she had no excuses. Tsunade needed to start working on the things she never had, now that her body was back in its prime. Slower than the last one. Jiraiya unhelpfully called out, just as she crossed the designated finishing line. "You're getting distracted, Harem." Tsunade leaned against the tree, taking her time to catch her breath. It was a frustrating situation, torn between annoyance at herself and a desire to not let anything get in the way of training. She wanted to take note of each victory and continue moving forward, but with the stakes so high, each stumble felt massive. "Almost as if there's someone constantly trying to distract me." She sneered at Jiraiya, who only laughed in response. "Come on, we both know trying to prove me wrong really motivates you." Jiraiya finally got up, dusting off his clothes. "Anyway, it looks like you've been inside your head lately." Again, he wasn't wrong, but it did irk her that others could see her struggling. As a former Hokage and veteran of multiple wars, she really should be stronger than this. "Well, I know the perfect way to snap you out of this." Jiraiya interrupted her thoughts, stepping closer to her. "How about a chance to beat me up?" Huh? Confusion visible, she wondered if she heard him correctly. "Come on. Nothing gets you more focused than beating me up," Jiraiya said, sliding into a fighting stance. "So let's spar. Right now." In a way, she relished the chance to test her strength. At the same time, she couldn't use all of her tricks without having to answer some awkward questions. Nevertheless, she had to take this opportunity. Without a word, she mirrored Jiraiya's fighting stance, causing him to break into a wide smile. Both of them knew the fight had just started. "Let's see if you can still knock me over with one finger." As a response, she rushed forward towards him. Instead of one single strong attack like he was expecting, she dropped down and tried to catch him with a leg sweep. To her chagrin, Jiraiya casually jumped, letting the attack go harmlessly under him. It was a pretty damning reminder that she was just not fast enough. Blocking the predictable kick from Jiraiya, Tsunade leapt back, trying to get some space between the two. As expected, he was enough of a showboat to let her have that space. There was no way he wouldn't taunt her after that. And to make things better, she'd landed near the rocky part of the clearing. "Come on, Harem. You'll have to do better than that to take me out," Jiraiya taunted, making a show of dusting his clothes. "So you don't want me to take you out?" Tsunade asked, probing to see if that could catch him off guard. At the same time, she was slowly straying to her right to reach one of the larger rocks in her vicinity. "I'm not sure I believe it." Jiraiya copied her movement and moved to his right so they were circling each other. "Of course I do, but it wouldn't be the same with a bit of physical activity, if you know what I mean." Tsunade was now right beside a large rock which looked almost as tall as herself. Meanwhile, Jiraiya was in the empty part of the clearing with nothing to hide behind. Instead of giving him the time to use ninjutsu or make more bad jokes, Tsunade quickly knelt down and used both her hands to rip the massive rock from the ground. Digging a foot into the ground for leverage, she gathered her strength before tossing the rock towards Jiraiya. The attack was a fair bit more serious than what you'd expect for spars, but Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru knew each other's limits well enough at this point. Like she expected, Jiraiya responded with a massive fireball that engulfed the rock before exploding it into small chunks. Tsunade used the light and sound of the explosion to camouflage herself as she darted forward. When she exited a plume of dust and smoke that was recently a massive boulder, she caught Jiraiya still in the middle of forming hand seals. He was blazing through the seals, faster than either her or Orochimaru could manage at the time. Fast, but not fast enough. All elegance tossed aside, Tsunade used the inertia of her rush to kick out at him. Just as Jiraiya finished forming the tiger seal, her attack landed. Instead of solid flesh, she felt her leg move harmlessly through smoke as Jiraiya's shadow clone popped. Whatever curse Tsunade had was interrupted when she saw a fireball in her peripheral vision. Using all of her strength, she jumped into the air just as a fireball struck where she was a second ago. This is going to be annoying, Tsunade thought, before forming hand seals while in midair. Ninjutsu wasn't exactly her specialty, so directly outmatching Jiraiya wasn't an option. But all she had to do here was pull something to catch him off guard. Tsunade finished her hand seals just as she landed on the ground, only to notice another fireball heading right towards her. Doten, Doryuheiki. She slammed her hands into the ground and finished the jutsu, and felt the earth shift under her palms. Barely a moment later, there was a solid wall of earth right in front of Tsunade. Not a second later, a fireball hit the wall with a thundering crash. Her view was clouded with dirt, debris, and the brightness from the fireball, but the wall held firm. She'd put enough chakra into it that Jiraiya would have to put some real effort into destroying this thing. He'd eventually get through, of course, so she wasn't completely safe. But with this reprieve, she had more than enough time to pull off her next technique. Using this out in the open was tough since it took far too much time to gather the chakra and finish the hand seals. She could do more damage with her punches after all. But now was the perfect chance to use the attack. Something to hit Jiraiya from range that he definitely wouldn't expect. As yet another fireball collided with her wall, Tsunade took a deep breath and focused on evening out the energies of her chakra. Another fireball crashed against the wall as she went through the hand seals of the technique, and just as she closed the final seal, Tsunade leapt away from the cover. Raiden, Kasi no Yari. Lightning chakra gathered in her right palm, before lengthening to the size of a spear. Every moment the jutsu was active, she could feel her control over it slipping slowly as the lightning yearned to escape. The air was full of debris, dust, and smoke from burning grass, but she could easily pinpoint Jiraiya across the field. Without waiting for the jutsu to overpower her control, she threw the spear in Jiraiya's direction. Jiraiya barely had any time before the blinding light came faster than any other Raiden jutsu he'd seen before. He dodged, but just barely, feeling the residual wind hit his face. With a loud shriek the jutsu tore into the ground a few feet behind him. Tsunade rolled on the ground before running towards him at full speed. Her jutsu might have missed, but Jiraiya would definitely know that he can't just sit back and attack her. Not after she'd shown her own ranged ninjutsu. Finally getting serious, huh? Jiraiya called out, as a plume of dust from her attack settled around him. As she expected, he kept his ground and got into a taijutsu stance. They were going to finish this the same way it started. Tsunade was now too close for Jiraiya to use ninjutsu without her interrupting. Well, I won't say no to a one-on-one physical session. As always, Jiraiya couldn't help but make another immature joke. Meanwhile, Tsunade was trying to think of an avenue of attack. They really didn't spar often, and most of the time, it was a one-sided beat-up after Jiraiya did something perverted. Right now, he was faster and had more reach, on top of being well-rested. Her biggest advantage was the regeneration from her seal, but she didn't have it right now and it really wasn't the time to try. She still had her strength, reduced as it was, but it wasn't useful if she couldn't actually land a hit. But while Jiraiya was still strong, he couldn't compete with her decades of experience. She closed the distance between them once again, before raising her right hand for a punch. In response, Jiraiya simply stood where he was, confident in his ability to dodge her blows. In hindsight, her way of fighting was fairly predictable when she was young. Try to land a punch and make it as hard as you can. Knowing Jiraiya, he'd wait until the last second to dodge her, just to rub it in. As she reached him, Tsunade slammed her foot down hard, far harder than she'd hit Jiraiya in a casual spar, and the ground gave way as if it was flimsy paper instead of solid earth under her. For less than a second, Jiraiya lost his footing as the ground cratered, cracked, and spider-webbed around the two fighters. It was a very short moment of imbalance, but in a fight, that's all it took. Unable to jump away in time, Jiraiya leaned to his right, trying to preemptively dodge her punch. And that was perfect as far as she was concerned. Instead of a punch, Tsunade dropped her right hand and attacked with a palm thrust from her left hand. Jiraiya saw her move and brought his arms up to block the attack, too late to try and dodge now. Her palm connected and Jiraiya was thrown across the clearing before coming to a sudden halt against the trunk of a massive tree. A thundering sound rang across the forest at the collision. She didn't have to wait for a confirmation, Jiraiya was down for the count after that hit. Once the adrenaline rush faded, Tsunade realized what she had just done. Running to the spot where she sent Jiraiya flying, she found him collapsed at the foot of the tree with a Jiraiya-shaped dent on the tree trunk behind him. His eyes were lost, staring at nothing, while he lay breathless. His left arm, which had received the strongest impact, was bent in a weird shape. He looked like he was in a lot of pain. Habit took over for her as Tsunade knelt down in a hurry and started healing his injuries. Her hands started to glow green as she surveyed his body, starting with his head. No internal bleeding there, good. Then she opened his robe to check his abdomen, no splinters poking in or broken ribs puncturing internal organs. Before she could move on to his arm, Jiraiya's voice suddenly piped up. "If I could have you on top of me this easily, I'd have done this ages ago." Resisting the urge to bang his head against the tree, Tsunade gave him a fond smile. For a quick second, she'd thought she'd gotten careless and hit him harder than he could handle. Of course, Jiraiya was far too tough to go down that easily. And that comment just reassured her that he was fine. "Don't test your luck unless you want another broken hand." Her tone was still warm despite the harsh words. "Now let's check that arm." With practiced proficiency, Tsunade cracked the egg before pouring it onto the bowl of rice. At one point, even doing this much would have been a challenge, but she got the hang of it eventually. Using 2 chopsticks, she quickly mixed the egg into the hot rice. Thinking back to her previous attempts, it was embarrassing how many bowls she shattered just by applying too much force. Leaving the bowl for a second, she went to check the vegetables cooking on the stove and gave them a quick stir. Broccoli, asparagus, carrots, mushrooms and some other greens she found in the fridge. Adding a bit more sauce and some sesame seeds to them, Tsunade turned the fire on low. Unlike her grandmother who frequently went overboard, Tsunade was fine with something simple for dinner. Still, it just felt nice to get some cooking done, something small she could control. Turning back to the rice, Tsunade poured furikake and a splash of soy sauce before mixing it some more. She was never a particularly good cook, more like a disaster waiting to happen. Her uncle had a particular knack for cracking jokes about it. She hadn't learned the basics until later in her life, when cooking became a necessary skill. After letting her grandmother cook for her for so long, Tsunade wanted to do something nice for a change. And of course, she might not get an earful for wrecking the training ground if the dinner improves Mito's mood. Putting the bowl of rice down, Tsunade went and tasted the vegetable stew, just the perfect amount of saucy. Turning off the stove and taking the spoon and serving it on top of her rice. In the distance, she could hear Mito's footsteps coming down the stairs. Picking up her pace, Tsunade prepared the next bowl of rice and finished just as her grandmother entered the kitchen. Putting the last of the trays in the sink, she left enough space for both of them to sit down and eat, internally proud of herself for not making a mess of the kitchen. While her cooking skills improved in leaps and bounds, her ability to mess up the kitchen more or less stayed the same. And nobody was more familiar with her kitchen disasters than Mito. A part of Tsunade still felt like a nervous child as her grandmother examined the food she'd prepared. During the last time around, she never had the chance to make anything actually good for her grandmother. While this was a simple dinner, it was also the opportunity to show her how much she had learned in a subtle way. Mito carefully tasted the stew, taking a few long seconds to take it in before responding. "It tastes good." The hell? Tsunade felt a confusing mix of pride and annoyance at her grandmother's opinion. She didn't put the bar that low, did she? Meanwhile, her grandmother looked visibly shocked as she tasted the rice as well and didn't find it inedible. Even after tasting it all, she continued examining the dishes with the air of an art critic looking at a painting. "Were you expecting it to be poisoned or something?" Tsunade muttered petulantly. "Well, not intentionally at least. You know how your cooking gets." Mito replied as she took the bowls of rice to the dining table. Tsunade ignored the light-hearted insult and started helping her set up. Within minutes, only the sounds of chopsticks against the bowls filled the room as they ate together. Tsunade was just too drained from her spar to do anything but eat. Before she knew it, her bowl was empty and her stomach was still nowhere near full. Silently thankful she made more than necessary, she got up to go get some seconds. As soon as she left the table, her grandmother called out to her. She just followed her way to the kitchen to get seconds. "We need to talk." She felt the grip she had on the bowl falter for a second at the 4 words. No other 4 words could be as anxiety-inducing. Tsunade put on a blank face as she slowly made her way back to the table, trying to not think of all the possible scenarios of what Mito might want to talk about. What about? Fur's sake. Her composure was immediately shattered and she was stuttering like a child now. "I can feel you shaking in your boots, Sun-chan." Mito pointed out. "Nothing bad, I need to ask something from you." "Sure." Tsunade took a seat, trying to control her breathing. Even with decades of experience, she never quite outgrew her fear of her grandmother. "I'll ask you a question, and I need you to be 100% honest with me, understand?" Not trusting her voice, Tsunade simply nodded in response. Mito was sitting in front of her with her fingers steepled together, staring at her with more intensity than she'd ever seen before. It wasn't malice or anger, but a sense of pure focus, as if she was trying to see through her. Unable to meet her grandmother's eyes, Tsunade dropped her head and looked at the table instead. A bowl of rice was right in front of her, looking less appetizing by the second. Instead of hunger, a deep sense of anxiety now occupied her stomach. She continued staring, trying to focus on the smooth wooden panels of the table. In her peripheral vision, she noticed that her grandmother's bowl of rice was empty. An uncomfortable silence stretched between the two before it was broken by a deep sigh from Mito, followed by her question. "Who are you and what did you do with my granddaughter?" Chapter 8. Tsunade suddenly froze, as if someone had poured ice water down her back. She tried to throw back a quick retort, but as if her body was betraying her, she couldn't even open her mouth. The cold seeped through muscle and bone, until Tsunade felt her legs weaken beneath her. In the depths of her mind, she felt herself sinking into old memories from decades ago, of rain on her face, almost knee-deep in mud with strength fading out of her limbs, the acrid smell of death all around her as she herself was moments away from dying against an opponent that felt impossibly powerful. What had Sarutobi said about situations like this? When lying fails, you either fight or flee, right? And if that wasn't possible, a shinobi is supposed to die without giving up any intel. Completely useless lessons. She could feel the mental barriers she had put up cracking like thin glass. Her death would always be her overly expressive face. If something fazed her, you could always tell. No, it's, Tsunade willed the sounds to come out of her mouth. A defiant confirmation that she really was her granddaughter, but she gaped uselessly as her grandmother's gaze bore down on her. Seconds continued ticking by in silence, and Tsunade desperately wished she had something to offer here, maybe Orochimaru's composure or Jiraiya's ability to weave tales. "Tsunade, I need an answer. Did you hear me, or do I need to repeat myself?" She felt a renewed spike of panic at her grandmother's words and at the total lack of warmth in them. This wasn't the person who'd go through hell and back for her, the one that held her when the world was too much and taught her to be strong. In her place sat an enemy shinobi. When facing a hostile Mito Uzumaki, all she could do was ask in a wavering voice. How? I don't know, maybe the sudden change in your mood." Mito tapped her fingers on the table as if to emphasize her point, "or maybe it's because you somehow mastered an A-rank Raiden jutsu even though you've never practiced the chakra nature." She slammed her fist on the table. "Or maybe the fact that a few weeks ago you could barely boil an egg without making a disaster, and today you magically cooked a decent dinner." Taking a deep breath to calm herself down, Mito continued, "I think I know my granddaughter well enough to see the sudden changes, so tell me. Who are you?" Tsunade had been careless, and those things her grandma just listed made her realize she needed to be more careful in the future. The cat was out of the bag, and there was no way to keep it hidden anymore. She weighed all the options at hand, only to realize she had to opt for the last resort, the most unlikely route to take in this situation: tell her the truth. After all, it was impossible to lie to Mito. I am Tsunade. She managed to choke out at the end. It was the truth, It might have sounded like a futile attempt to conceal a lie, but it was the best she could offer. Sucking in a deep breath, she repeated with a slight bit more confidence. I really am Tsunade. Mito immediately stopped her. Listen, I might play the fool on the outside, but I've been dealing with people long enough, and I know when someone's trying to bullshit me. Somehow, she managed to soften her tone. I know you mean no harm, but I need to know where my grandkid is and if she is safe. Now, the only thing left to do was to look Mito in the eyes and let them see her sincerity. I am Tsunade, I know you can tell if I am lying. I am Senju Tsunade, but not the Tsunade you remember. Taking a deep breath to steady her speech and thought process, she continued, I don't know how, but out of nowhere, I just ended up here. Ended up here from where? I need more than vague explanations. Mito's expression remained unchanged, but the fact that she hadn't eviscerated Tsunade yet was a good sign. Alright, what I am about to say is going to sound like complete bullshit, and I don't blame you if you don't believe me. At this point, she didn't care enough to be polite, but the truth is, I am from the future. A tense silence filled the room at Tsunade's confession. I don't know what happened, or how I got here, I just don't know. The silence continued, and Mito's expression shifted before falling back into the expressionless mask she used in formal situations. How many? At Tsunade's confused look, Mito repeated, how many years in the future? Wait, you believe me? Her grandmother's stoic expression shifted to a small smile before responding. Well, I know nobody that would be stupid enough to use this crazy of a lie to trick me. And I can sense you mean no harm, I just wanted answers, Mito added. So tell me, how many years? Amazingly enough, the once cold tone of her voice was wearing off into pure curiosity now. Tsunade's shoulders relaxed very slightly. Repeating a calculation she'd done hundreds of times since she arrived here, she responded, 37. Instead of being shocked, Mito just seemed amused at the fact. And you still act like a brat, huh? Yeah, only Uzumaki Mito would joke around in a situation like this. A sudden wave of relief went through her body at the stupid joke. Adult or not, Tsunade just couldn't handle her grandmother treating her like a menace. The relief must have shown on her face because Mito lightly put her hand on her shoulder. Hey, I might look 17, but I'm actually. Don't worry, you're still a brat compared to me, even if you're a bit older now. At her grandmother's fond response, Tsunade couldn't help but feel like she was home for the first time in decades, and like the weight of her secret had fallen from her shoulders. Overcome with relief and joy, she couldn't help but throw her arms around her grandma in a warm embrace. And as she sank into the hug, for the first time since she landed in the past, she let herself feel all the happiness of having her grandma back. He finally had someone to talk to, someone who could understand. Despite claiming to be an adult earlier, Tsunade suddenly felt very much like a child again, and she didn't mind one bit. Sun-chan, I have so many questions. She motioned Tsunade to sit down, but first things first. What were you doing before all this happened? Tsunade hung on to her grandmother for a few more seconds before reluctantly letting go. Taking in a deep breath, she thought back to that night. Well, I remember drinking sake. Some things never change, huh? Mito interrupted. Squashing the urge to pout at her grandmother's wisecracking, Tsunade continued, then I went to sleep, and when I woke up, I was here. You gotta be kidding me, I need a bit more than that, Sun-chan. Biting back a retort, Tsunade dropped her head into her palms and racked her mind. Even after many nights of thinking, nothing else had occurred to her. There was no magical clue that made everything click into place. She got drunk, blacked out, and woke up in the past. Any jutsu experimentation? Nothing besides medical ninjutsu. Unstable seals, maybe. Or space-time ninjutsu. Maybe you made a mistake. I might not be Uncle Tobarama, but I can tell medical ninjutsu from space-time ninjutsu. Tsunade felt her professional pride rise up in indignation at the comment. And I never reached enough mastery of seals to create things complex enough to end up with this result. Kids these days, Mito muttered, I was just asking if you mixed things up when drunk. I can hold my sake. Mito didn't even dignify that with a response. Anyway, I guess you weren't messing around with advanced seals. That's on me for not teaching you more. Why are you asking me about seals, though? I know they can be strong, but this is time travel. It could have been anything. Gotta start with what we know, Sun-chan, or we'd be here forever. I am too tired for this. Anyway, you finally cooked something edible, so just sit down and finish it. Mito reminded her. Hell, that's even more unbelievable than the time travel. At Tsunade's sour expression, Mito added. Hey, look at the bright side, your grandma is back, and now you can learn all the good cooking tricks from her. Now that she thought about it, Tsunade never really got the chance to cook together with her grandma. There was a lot Mito could teach her, and Tsunade regretted not giving her the time to teach her until it was too late. I actually look forward to that. That's for tomorrow, Sun-chan, go and get some sleep now. The moon was in its full splendor when Mito felt the need to leave her study. The past few hours had been a whirling mess of emotions, and honestly, she still didn't know what to think. After making sure Tsunade was a good distance away, she quietly got up and made her way through the empty manor. Her feet carried her out of the manor and then through the forest with practiced ease, even with her mind lost in thought. With the hustle and bustle of Konoha close by the manor, she'd often find herself going deeper and deeper into the ancient forest to experience some silence. Anyone else would have gotten lost already, but she didn't have this worry. In her younger years, Mito had explored every inch of this forest together with her husband, and even now, she recognized every boulder and tree stump. And while the forest was ever-changing, the sense of peace she felt was the same each time. After a while, she leaned back against a nearby tree to rest. The evening dew seeped into her robes. She didn't know what to let herself feel. Rage at potentially losing her only remaining family. Happiness at seeing her grow up. Or maybe, just fear of what lay ahead. She'd been sitting on these emotions for so long, but, whatever her Tsunade was now, Mito knew she still loved her grandma. She didn't have the answers yet, but for now, that was enough to keep her going. And here I thought I was too experienced to be surprised by anything. Perhaps it was arrogance on her part, but Mito really thought she'd seen everything until this mess landed in her hands. She was expecting her life to revolve around raising her granddaughter followed by a quiet death, not time travel of all things. I thought sealing that stupid fox was going to be my last hurrah. Then again, life never had boring plans written in Mito's destiny, as much as she wished for a simple and peaceful life. And as dangerous as it was, she couldn't deny that a part of her really did yearn for this kind of challenge. Seconds turned to minutes as Mito stood against the tree, taking in the stillness of the forest. Maybe if she had the time, she could stay like this all day, enjoying the peace and quiet. But of course, she had someone to talk to and questions that needed to be answered. Someone knowledgeable and, most importantly, trustworthy. And if there was one person in Konoha that she could count on in times like these, it was her closest friend and confidant, Umi Uzumaki. With the decision made, Mito quickened her pace as she headed in the direction of the village. As the official liaison of Uzushiogakure, her close friend had a lot of responsibilities that kept her awake into the late hours of the night. On paper, her job seemed enviable. She'd mostly receive messages from Uzushio, send them to the Hokage, and send Konoha's messages back to her home village. Of course, people didn't realize just how paranoid Uzushiogakure was about its messages. Each one was encrypted thoroughly, and the encryption method itself changed regularly. That meant Umi had to spend most of her time decoding incoming messages and the rest encoding her own. The Uzumaki were peaceful people but extremely careful about the information on their seals. As far as they were concerned, knowledge was power, so theft of their knowledge was treated with the same seriousness as the Hyuga treated theft of the Byakugan. On the other hand, the Senju weren't so secretive about their own knowledge of ninjutsu, perhaps ill-advisedly so, and would trade the information for resources and political gains. Hence why they gained their name of the clan with 1,000 skills, as every time, they strived to gain new abilities and powers to make up for the ones they exchanged. Each jutsu that was given away or stolen by the Uchiha would be replaced by a stronger version, so their enemies would never be able to get a handle on their true capabilities. Since the Senju and the Uzumaki had such radically different ideas on how clan secrets were handled, it was a miracle that they got along so well. As someone with ties to both clans, she could see the merit in both of their methods. The Senju amassed a large number of alliances and political ties while the Uzumaki avoided large conflicts as other clans were loath to fight an enemy they knew nothing about. As she entered the quiet nighttime streets of Konoha, she wondered just how much her friend knew, and what the consequences might be for sharing this information. Without any rush, she made her way through the village and towards Umi's office. As soon as she reached her destination, Mito used a well-placed kick to open the door with ease. Not only did it save her valuable time, but Umi would also immediately realize it was her. After all, nobody else would dare to do that. She could sense Umi upstairs in her office, most likely still hard at work given her emotional state. Due to her special gift, Mito always had an accurate measure of everyone else no matter what situation arose. As a result, it was very rare for her to be caught completely by surprise. Today was the first time in a while, and she wasn't eager to have a shock like that again. "Please come in." Mito heard her friend call out from upstairs, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And feel free to punch a hole in the staircase while you're at it." Of course, it was all Konoha's property, so neither of them particularly cared about the damages. She made her way up the stairs and found herself looking at the only open door on the whole floor. Once again, she kicked it open, more than happy to create a small amount of headache for Sarutobi in the future. Despite all the clutter, Mito couldn't help but find something comforting about the place. While Umi could easily find a larger place if she petitioned the village, it would lack the intimacy of this small place that stood since the very beginning of Konoha. Umi Uzumaki's office resembled a library more than anything else. The walls were covered in shelves packed full of scrolls and books. Even more scrolls laid open on the coffee table that stood in the middle of the room, right underneath the solitary light bulb illuminating the whole room. Mito couldn't help but take a deep breath as she entered, taking in the smell of old paper, coffee, wood, and fresh ink, as well as the night breeze flowing through the open windows. Without greeting her friend, Mito briskly crossed the room and closed both of the windows. The simple action gained her a weird look from Umi, who then continued to work. Mito knew nobody was spying on them, so the gesture was just a small signal that an important discussion was about to begin. "Coffee." Without looking up from the desk, Umi signaled to the coffee pot on her right. Mito ignored the request, as it was long past coffee time for any normal person. "Going to spend the rest of the night working. You know I have always been more of a night owl. Time just lasts longer during the night, doesn't it?" Not willing to beat around the bush, Mito decided to skip the small talk. "Listen, Umi, I am going to be blunt with you. There was a time you weren't blunt with me." Umi asked in fake shock, putting the scrolls down and finally looking up at Mito. "This is serious, and I need your help because it really was hard to put the situation into words. Well, something has happened to Tsunade, and I have absolutely no idea what it was." Umi's demeanor instantly changed as the gravity of the whole situation started to dawn on her. While Mito wasn't arrogant enough to proclaim knowledge of everything, she was well versed enough in all ninja arts that complete ignorance of something was worrying. "Tell me everything," Umi requested, voice dripping with curiosity and concern. Without missing a beat, Mito gave a quick rundown of the past few weeks, followed by the events of that evening. By the end, the office was filled with a contemplative silence as the two wondered what to make of the whole thing. Sun-chan is 54, and trapped in her 17-year-old body, with her memories intact, said Umi, finally breaking the silence, complete disbelief in her voice. "Well, she says she is, even though she looks the same as usual." Mito responded, "She's not lying, and I don't feel any ill intent from her either." "So she truly believes it all, too?" Her friend mused, "Has she made any predictions or given any proof?" "Nothing that can be verified yet, and I'd rather not interrogate her if I can help it." Her mind flashed back to Tsunade's crying face, and the thought of interrogation went away as quickly as it arrived. "To be frank, I don't know what to think at this point. And talking to her hasn't brought me remotely close to an answer." Seals. Maybe something Tobarama worked on years ago. No. Jutsu experimentation then. Or any artifacts that she may have come in contact with. Nothing, anything, nada, there's not a thing. That's the confusing part. She literally just woke up one day and was 37 years in the past. Umi leaned back on her chair, suddenly looking a lot more tired than she had mere minutes ago. Mito didn't have the faintest idea how one should react to news like this, but Umi seemed to be taking this much better than she imagined. She had expected a lot more threats of physical violence. After a few moments, the silence was interrupted. Don't you find it odd that only her mind was the one traveling back? What? In a less elegant way than intended, Mito couldn't help but question her friend's idea. Umi had a special talent when it came to thinking outside the box, and that definitely helped in the field of cryptography, but she had the tendency to offer the weirdest advice. It could be infuriating or ingenious, depending on her mood. If you're saying it's just some false memories, that doesn't explain why she knows new ninjutsu out of nowhere. I saw her with my own eyes, and it takes quite a bit of actual practice to become proficient to that degree. The mind works in strange ways, Mito, and we've barely scratched the surface of it all. With that frustratingly enigmatic answer, her friend stood up, walked to one of the numerous shelves on the wall, and started rifling through the various scrolls. While Umi was her most trusted confidant, her approach to solving problems always involved some kind of proven logic, and she refused to consider any alternatives. Her friend's stubbornness infuriated Mito at times, but she always appreciated the different perspective. Umi returned to her seat with an armful of scrolls and unceremoniously dropped the load on the desk. At a quick glance, Mito could tell they were mostly about the human mind, mind-related ninjutsu, and mental healing, nothing about time travel or even time-space ninjutsu. I'm not saying Tsunade was lying when she said she traveled through time. Her friend responded and then tossed a particularly hefty scroll at her. Completely used to Umi throwing heavy items unprompted, Mito caught the object with practiced ease. Upon examination, it was a copy of an old mission report, decades old at the very least. But we need to go through all the possibilities, and messing with one person's mind is far easier than messing with the laws of space and time. Mito skimmed through the scroll, which detailed a scouting mission from Konoha into the Land of Iron, which was derailed by a confrontation with a team from Iowa. The trio from Konoha was then beset by a snowstorm, and after being stranded for over 2 weeks, they managed to make their way back without any fatalities. A somewhat inspiring story. Sarutobi could definitely make a speech out of it and send more children to their deaths, but Mito failed to see the relevance. At her expression, Umi added, "Read that part towards the end, the bit where they dealt with the injuries and the post-mission status." With a beleaguered sigh, Mito opened the scroll once again and read the indicated passage in detail. As the team was stuck without any medication, they had no way of dealing with one person's rapidly worsening infection. His teammates soon lost hope for a rescue or recovery and then decided that the most honorable thing to do was to let him pass away peacefully. At the same time, they were still inexperienced and hadn't the heart to perform a merciless kill. As an alternative, the Yamanaka on the team used a mind-altering jutsu on the dying shinobi to put him in a peaceful stupor instead. The trio would then go on to be rescued before anyone could die, and the mission was officially deemed a success. And according to the report, the injured shinobi ended up making a full recovery but decided to retire as a result of unspecified, mental difficulties. Strange. Mito murmured, seems somewhat vague at the end. I had the same thought and decided to look into it. The Yamanaka clan was trying to keep it quiet, so I had to pull some levers to learn more. If a clan was trying to keep something silent, then it almost always meant it had something to do with their hidden techniques. And from what I found out, the mind-altering ninjutsu didn't go as planned, and he woke up with no memories of his old life, not even his name. I talked to him myself, Umi continued, and he genuinely thought he was an ordinary farmer and had absolutely no knowledge of the shinobi arts. He had years and years of memories too, of a childhood, parents, friends, neighbors, none of whom actually existed. Certain similarities to Tsunade's situation were clear, and Mito couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up her spine. Just one incompetent and panicked Yamanaka was enough to completely change a person, and something similar could have happened to her own granddaughter. Your theory is that something changed in Tsunade's mind to the point that she lived many more decades and even became proficient in different techniques. Umi took a deep sip from the cup and replied, I don't have enough information to be making theories at the moment, but yes, something along those lines. And even if we assume Tsunade traveled back in time, it's not her physical self that went back. So what's better than to start with the foundation? I see your point, Mito admitted, so it is like only a part of her traveled back, and more specifically, her mind. Considering she is half Yamanaka and the clan is known for their mind jutsu, maybe the simplest answer is the right one. Umi drained her cup empty after the proclamation, then promptly got up to make more. Mito looked at the mess of scrolls on the desk, some even falling to the floor, before pulling out a seat for herself. Make some for me too. The people of Konoha were milling out into the streets as Mito approached the flower shop. The sun had finally risen, bathing the village in a warm and comfortable glow, the best time to be out and about. Despite the pleasant environment, she wasn't in the best of moods. Crashing Umi's couch all night had left her with a sore back. She managed to hide the pain from showing in her walk, but it was going to be an uncomfortable morning. The whole night had been devoted to finding any resemblance of an answer to what could have happened. Of course, they weren't expecting to find a complete answer in a single day, but a disappointingly small amount of information turned out to be useful. It led them to the conclusion that they needed help from someone with more knowledge of the mind. Luckily for them, the right person was close and more than willing to lend a hand if it helped Tsunade. However, his exuberance didn't make him any less infuriating to talk to. She found him watering his plants with an air of serenity that made Mito want to ruin his mood. "It will rain today," she said. "You don't need to bother." Inaku looked up at her and then at the smattering of clouds hanging on the horizon. With a smile, he replied, "Coming from you, I believe it, but a habit is a habit, you know." He leaned down and continued watering the plants. Mito had to squash the urge to kick dirt into his face. Someone less experienced with his nonsense would make the mistake of asking what he was talking about and let him derail the conversation. But she had no time for shenanigans today. "They'll survive. We need to talk, get inside." Without waiting for his response, Mito walked into the flower shop. Much to her annoyance, she heard Inaku finish watering the pot before following behind her. Taking the initiative to skip inane pleasantries, she got right down to business. "I need you to answer some questions for me. I'm glad there are still things I know and you don't." Inaku smirked, before taking his seat behind the counter. "I must be doing something right. Quit the sass and please give me straight answers." It was best to not directly compliment someone like Inaku, lest it get to his head. "This is about Tsunade, so I don't want to waste any time." As she hoped it might, his expression immediately turned somber and Mito began describing the events of the evening. By the time she finished, Inaku seemed to be in deep thought. She couldn't blame him. Even after so many hours, she still wasn't sure what to make of the whole experience. With a heavy sigh, he leaned back on his chair. "Sunsen really has a way of getting into trouble, doesn't she?" For once, Mito couldn't blame the boy for making that comment since Tsunade got into a fair share of trouble over the years. This time it wasn't her getting into scrapes or gambling away her pocket money. Her granddaughter was in deep trouble and Mito had no idea how, even if she could help. Years had hardened her to loss, but losing Tsunade was unimaginable. She just couldn't allow it to happen, not after everything she's already lost. "Since you're coming to me, I assume you think this is all in Tsunade's head." Or something along those lines. "Honestly speaking, I have no idea what to think," Mito admitted. "But that is a start, yes. And don't forget, she's also using jutsus and techniques that she had no way of learning." Inaku stilled for a moment, as if trying to make a decision, before responding, "All right, before I say anything, just remember that most of this is just theory." After the serious disclaimer, his jovial attitude slipped out, if only a little bit, and he added, "You know, the rest of the village thinks we're some kind of experts on controlling the human mind, but we honestly don't know much. It's kind of embarrassing, actually, but what can you do, right?" He looked at her unamused expression and continued, "Anyway, there's one thing that stood out to me. You said she was expertly doing things she'd never done before, right?" "That is correct. From my estimation, it should take years of practice to reach that level of proficiency, and I know Tsunade hasn't done anything of the sort." He mused for a second, before adding, "Specifically, patterns of movement, stuff that takes practice, like the correct order of frumming hand seals to being able to chop vegetables. Those kind of things can't be manipulated like visual tangible memories. If you're saying that it is impossible, then you're obviously wrong. I've seen it happen with my own eyes. I am not saying that they can be manipulated. What I really mean is that manipulating that procedimental memory and even more to the extent you're describing could have catastrophic side effects. Everything from walking to forming words could be affected." "I see." If he was right, it meant one of two things. Either Tsunade encountered the most proficient mind bender, in which case she would have visible side effects no one has seen, or, she was telling the truth. Neither of these were pleasant to imagine, so what do you think happened to Tsunade? I wish I knew, Inaku let out a weary sigh, but this is a first, even for our clan. We've had cases of people forgetting those important deep-seated memories, but gaining new ones. Mito looked at Inaku's fidgety hands, her eyes narrowing. What aren't you telling me? Like I said, our clan's jutsus barely scratch the surface of what one can do with the human mind. There's not any Yamanaka jutsu, or mind jutsu for that matter, to implant those memories. Inaku took a deep breath before continuing, but we have theories. And a couple of them could explain what Sun-chan is going through. Do go on. Unlike her friend, Mito had gone through life without much desire to discover the secret jutsus of their allied clans. As far as she was concerned, they could keep their knowledge as long as their intent wasn't malicious. Consequently, she didn't have a clear idea of what their capabilities might be, so this could be interesting to hear. It is a theoretical jutsu that my grandfather once talked to me about. It is not something to actually perform, but to theorize how far we could take our mind techniques as a clan and to do lower-scale versions to create new jutsu. Dropping his volume a notch, he asked her, you know how difficult time-space ninjutsu is, right? Very clearly. Her brother-in-law's wayward experiments had caused much destruction all around the manor before he got the technique down. Even Hashirama was beginning to lose his temper by the end, which was a greater achievement than manipulating the fabric of reality. As you know, sending a body through space to another point is tough and takes a lot of chakra. Time is similar, but a lot more difficult. While she didn't have expertise in Hiraishin, these were all things that Mito already knew. One can move freely between space, but time moves in one direction at a set rate, and to go against it is much harder. She responded, according to Tobarama, time-space manipulation on that scale would need so much energy that all the chakra in the world wouldn't be enough. Exactly, which is why nobody else even bothers to research that stuff. After all, the Senju are a different breed, and Tobarama was a genius. Despite the bitter words, Inaku's tone was still cheerful. The rest of us could only theorize, but my grandfather had an interesting theory. He thought of something that might reduce the chakra requirement to something slightly less impossible. Basically, if we take out the body from the equation, that leaves only the mind that we had to transport, kinda like an amplified version of a mind-body switch. But instead of switching minds, we would transport our conscience to another point in time and space. That sounds insanely powerful. Devastating in the wrong hands. Just plain frightening, useful, too useful to pass up on if I were to be honest. Inaku just let out a short laugh at her words. Well, we're not exactly up there with the Uchiha and Senju when it comes to chakra capacity, so these theories are just theories for us. That much was true. Aside from Tsunade, who wasn't privy to any of the secret clan jutsu, the rest of the Yamanaka were adept at making the most out of what little chakra they had. Hell, I don't think even the 9 tails and your chakra combined would be enough to do it. And even that is just a theory, there's no telling if it even works in reality. And that's pretty much all we know about it. Like Umi had said, this might not have been the answer, but it had been a start. And right now, even something that small felt like a huge lifeline. Seeing that he had nothing more to add, she decided the best course of action was to let him find out more about it. I want you to collect all the information you have about this theory and bring it to me. With that declaration, Mito Uzumaki left for the door. A good thing about Inaku was that he knew her well enough that she didn't have to bother with posturing or overt threats. While he cared about Tsunade, he also knew that there was absolutely nothing she wouldn't do for her granddaughter, and something as trivial as Yamanaka clan secrets weren't going to stand in her way. The bell of the shop sounded in the background as she made her way out of the store and through the streets of Konoha. After these conversations, Mito finally felt like a weight was being lifted off her shoulders. Now, she could finally enjoy the crisp morning air and the warmth of the sun on her skin. She still wasn't sure about any of this, but now she knew that she wasn't dealing with this alone, and neither was Tsunade. With others to share the effort, it felt like they could somehow get to the bottom of this. And that left only one person for her to talk to, her granddaughter, who was supposedly from the future. Chapter 9. For Tsunade, Sleep that night came without any dreams, the tiredness of both the physical training and the mental exertion of dealing with Mito's ultimatum making sure of it. So, it was a pleasant surprise when she was woken up by a delicious smell coming from downstairs, instead of the usual manhandling from her grandmother. Rolling over, she turned her gaze towards the window and was met with a peculiar sight. She found herself squinting against bright sunlight streaming through the window. While she peacefully slept, the morning had already come and gone. The grogginess of sleep was immediately replaced by a combination of shock, guilt, and of course, disappointment at herself. When something as small as waking up on time could be so difficult, her ambitious plans felt impossible in comparison. There was nothing more to be done, and lamenting the lost morning would only cause more valuable time to trickle away. Tsunade forced herself upright, and then focused on the pleasant smell. Even in her half-asleep state, she immediately knew where it was coming from. Tsunade almost jumped out of her bed and ran out of her room, towards the kitchen downstairs. Just in time for breakfast, brat. Mito dryly remarked, not taking her eyes off the stove. Not a brat, remember. Until you can wake yourself up on time, you'll always be a brat. Not wishing to argue, Tsunade dug into the breakfast. Well, more like lunch judging by the hour. Almost shivering in anticipation, she picked up the chopsticks and slowly prodded at the slow-cooked chicken, rice and beans. It was something she'd tried to make before, to mixed results. Maybe it was her imperfect memory, or maybe it was just her lack of cooking skill, but the food never quite ended up right. Are you gonna eat the thing or just stare at it? Mito asked, plating some of the food for herself. Tsunade couldn't help but examine it. All of her previous efforts just looked wrong from the get-go. But this one, Tsunade thought to herself as she took her first taste. Predictably, her grandmother did not disappoint. It's perfect. It almost brought tears to her eyes, the explosion of flavors, perfect the combination of savory chicken, puffy rice and hearty beans felt in her mouth. The recipe had originally been an accident. Like a lot of Tsunade's childhood memories, this one also started with her throwing a tantrum. She wanted her beef and rice, and she wanted it now. Not willing to leave a cranky Tsunade alone in the house, Mito just substituted the beef for chicken and added beans to fill it out. What resulted was a culinary miracle. Not learning that recipe, deceptively simple though it seemed, was one of the biggest regrets of her life. On the other side of the table, Mito stared at her with no small amount of curiosity. What? Tsunade defended herself from whatever judgmental thoughts her grandma had going on in her head. It's really good, alright. If this caused you to audibly moan, Mito started, and Tsunade immediately dreaded what was probably coming. We really need to teach you how to cook for yourself. Sagging back in her chair, Tsunade let out a sign of relief. She wasn't going to have to deal with her grandmother talking about her life. Some things were too much for even the former Hokage to handle. You must be so loud, kiddo. If you are going to do that every time, keep it out of the house. Yup, there it was. She had too much faith in that old hag. Tsunade let out an inarticulate groan and tried to ignore her grandma. Any other time, she'd have tried to argue, but right now, the food took priority. Far too soon, the food was finished and Tsunade was staring forlornly at the empty plate. Such a beautiful, yet transient, experience. Oh, stop pouting, brat. There's more of everything in the stove. An exasperated Mito got and started piling up second helpings on her plate. Seconds later, Tsunade was happily gobbling down a second helping while Mito tried her best to ignore the moans. When the food was finished, Tsunade's sleep-induced grogginess was replaced by food-induced grogginess. Mito, on the other hand, looked as dignified as ever, despite having eaten enough food for a battalion. Too tired to voice a complaint about how unfair it was, Tsunade leant back and closed her eyes. Her rest was short-lived, however, as her grandma slammed a bento box on the table in front of her, shocking her alert. I need to clean up now, and you need to get lost. Go and give this to that friend you put in the hospital. He's not in the hospital. Tsunade tried to defend, but it only came out as a confused-sounding groan. I don't care if he's in his house, the hospital, or the morgue. Go and deliver this to him. Or if you're too tired, would you rather set the schedules when loud moans are permitted in the house? Tsunade was scrambling out of her seat and towards the door before Mito could even finish her sentence. You forgot the bento. Mito pointed out, before tossing the box in her general direction. Tsunade managed to grab it in midair, cursing her grandmother's unorthodox training methods. And soon Tsunade stopped on the kitchen threshold, wary of more flying objects. If I'm going to have to teach you to cook properly, be back in time to help with dinner. Got it, Tsunade responded, before turning away from her grandma to hide the giant smile on her face. She knew it was childish, but being able to replicate all her favorite dishes felt like a dream come true after living off takeout for half of her adult life. He's probably too injured to do whatever it is that you do at his place anyway. Mito added. She couldn't leave it at that, can she? Not willing to suffer her grandma's innuendos more than she already did, Tsunade slammed the door behind her and ran. Tsunade rediscovered that a normal 10-minute sprint took a fair bit longer with a full stomach. There was just something about her grandmother's cooking that made her want to return to the bed and sleep off the fullness. But that way lies danger, Tsunade thought. Since Mito clearly wanted to punish her for waking up late, not pissing her off further was the smart thing to do. Jiraiya's place was an inconspicuous apartment that was annoyingly hard to find based on her old memories. Nothing about that place made it seem like someone with an eccentric personality lived there. Of course, she knew Jiraiya better than anyone else, so it didn't surprise her that a skilled spy would have a place that didn't stand out. As soon as she knocked on the door, Tsunade heard frantic shuffling from inside. Before she could contemplate what it was, she was greeted by Jiraiya, clothed in nothing but a pair of boxers. If he wasn't injured, she would have shoved him inside using her super strength. Unfortunately, she had to make do with telling him to put a goddamn shirt on. Come on, Harem, I was alone in my own house. Jiraiya whined, plus it's hard to put a shirt on without the use of one arm. He tried fruitlessly to get his injured arm inside a sleeve, as if to illustrate his point. Tsunade sighed, not willing to admit that he was right. She had nobody to blame but herself for Jiraiya opening the door in his underwear. Let me help you with that, Tsunade offered through gritted teeth. She took his hand between her thumb and forefinger and guided the armhole over his injured arm. You know, smirked Jiraiya, my fantasies were more about you taking your clothes off, not putting them on me, but I can make do with this. Tsunade managed to resist the urge to whack him right on his injured arm but made a mental note to get back at him once he's healed. Don't push your luck, or you might end up with no working arms, said Tsunade, leaving the bento on the tiny kitchen counter. She went through his drawers and settled on one of his white undershirts, easy enough to not make both of them battle too much with getting it on. Come here, Tsunade said. Once he was in close distance she motioned him to duck enough for her to pass his head through the hole. Once the shirt was on, he raised his head, eyes staring at hers and a subtle smile playing on his face. All of a sudden, Tsunade realized how close his face was to hers, and an involuntary blush took over her face. She took a second to compose herself, otherwise Jiraiya would never let her live this down. Next, she went behind him and guided his non-injured arm, which easily went through the armhole. The easy part done, Tsunade then slowly guided the other arm, watching out for any winces or signs of pain. Luckily, the fabric of the shirt was stretchy enough to make the process more or less painless for Jiraiya. With both sleeves in, she reached out from behind him and pulled the shirt down to his waist. Standing in his room with her arms around him and their bodies so close to each other, Tsunade felt a sudden urge to let the moment go on and bask in the warmth of the feelings it evoked. At the moment, she felt like she could pull him closer together, and then fall together until all of her problems disappear forever. Instead, Tsunade let go of him and let the moment pass, feeling like she betrayed herself in some way. There, she said, her voice a little tighter than it should be, now you look decent enough to open the door to visitors. Jiraiya muttered something about, my own house, and human rights, before plopping down on the bed. Now that Jiraiya looked relatively decent, Tsunade decided to have a look around and see how he was living. Aside from a few unwashed dishes, everything looked surprisingly neat. Of course, the state of his arm made her wonder how much use the kitchen even got. Did you get lunch yet? Tsunade asked. What are you eating these days anyway? I hope it's not just instant ramen. Nah, mostly canned stuff or ramen from a stand nearby. Want to head out and grab something to eat? Forget about ramen, I've got something better. She pointed to the bento that she'd placed on the table. Come on, I don't want to take your lunch, Harem, said Jiraiya. It doesn't seem enough for two anyway. Let's go grab some ramen. Quote, I just had enough food to feed a small village, so I'll pass. That was only a partial truth. Mito's cooking was good enough that she'd gladly eat some more, no matter how full she was feeling just minutes ago. Unless you want to piss off my grandma, I'd suggest you eat more and talk less. The threat of her grandma was more than strong enough to convince Jiraiya. Within seconds, he was inhaling it like he hadn't tasted food in years. Essa good. Jiraiya yelled out, slamming the empty bento down on the table. Tsunade was pleasantly surprised that he waited until his mouth was no longer full to shout that. Not that you're not in danger of starving to death anymore, let's look at that hand of yours. Her much-practiced physician tone would hear no arguments. Since it had been her who got carried away, she had made sure to at least leave the fracture healed. When she first assessed his injury, she had already gone through a lot of her reserves during their sparring session. The inflammation hadn't been her priority when healing, and while the bone was fine, the surrounding tissue was still swollen, warm to the touch, and likely painful. Passing down her chakra-infused hands down his arm now, she could make sure to heal everything. It was a quick fix, nothing too major and even less when she had done it many times. I always knew you had a magic touch, Harem. Jiraiya smiled, flexing and rotating his hand. Let me pay you back with my magic touch. Don't make me throw you through the wall, idiot. Despite the words, Tsunade's tone was fond. Everyone who knew Jiraiya could attest to the fact that he was a stubborn and annoying pervert who could never keep his mouth shut. But for Tsunade, it was different, at least this time. Jiraiya was also an endless stream of positivity and inspiration, and he always believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. Even with all the spy missions he did, he was the type to be vocal about what he wants. If he said he was willing to give up everything to get together with her, Tsunade knew he meant it with all his heart. In the ambiguous world of shinobi where everyone has their own agenda, Jiraiya was a welcome reprieve. A person who Tsunade could count on, who was always waiting for her no matter how much she tried to run away from that part of herself. Right until the end, Jiraiya suddenly poked her in the cheek, bringing her out of her thoughts. You need to stop getting stuck inside your head, Harem. Easy way to get killed in battle. Despite all of Jiraiya's aforementioned positive qualities, it was still really annoying when he was right. Just thinking about what to cook for dinner. Tsunade waved off his concerns. Grandma is officially tutoring me in cooking, so it's serious business. Damn scary is what it is. Jiraiya slowly got up from the floor before stretching both arms. It seemed like he could hardly wait to get back into the action. I guess she can decide what to teach me. Jiraiya let out a wordless noise of agreement as he continued his stretching exercises. She watched as he expertly went through the routine, seeming completely combat-ready despite being too injured to put on a shirt by himself only a few minutes ago. Anyway, Tsunade interrupted before the silence could go on any longer. I'll head out and get some training done. You stay in and rest. Jiraiya gave her an unconvincing thumbs up, before continuing to stretch some more. Shaking her head with no small amount of fondness, Tsunade headed for the door. Tsunade had barely made her way out of the apartment building before an Anbu stopped in front of her and handed her a scroll. She didn't have to open the contents to know that it was from the Hokage's office. After years of being the Hokage, it was a strange feeling for her to be on the other side. She sighed as she opened it, recognizing Hirazen's familiar scrawl. While the man himself tried to maintain a dignified and elegant image, his handwriting was anything but, looking more like a hastily scribbled letter from a child rather than an official summons. She was asked to report to Training Ground 27 for some unspecified reason, but Tsunade could hazard a guess that it had to do with the war looming on the horizon. There goes my plan to stay in and learn to cook better. As petty as it was, she couldn't help but feel a tinge of disappointment at being forced to miss some time with her grandmother. In her past life, she'd happily thrown herself into being a ninja, and it wasn't until Mito had died that she realized just how little time they've been spending together in her final years. By that time, it was too late to do anything. Now, she resolves to make up for this lost time later. While the scroll didn't specify a time, it was an unwritten rule that any task ordered by the Hokage is to be carried out as soon as possible. And that meant rushing through the rooftops instead of a leisurely stroll like she preferred. A couple of minutes later, Tsunade was out of the main village area and near the training grounds. To her surprise, the place was almost full, with shinobi of all ranks and ages practicing all over the place. Putting the thoughts of kids fighting in the war out of her mind, she made her way to Training Ground 27, which sat near the outskirts of the training area. It had always been Sarutobi's favorite training ground since it was far enough that nobody could see him smoke his pipe and tell his students to practice by themselves. Of course, the team was more than happy to have that freedom, and this became the place where her team got most of their training done. An ugly feeling welled up in her stomach when she finally got a clear view of the training ground. A bunch of kids that looked just about old enough to be genin were going through various exercises. In the corner of the ground, she could make out a very familiar figure slouching against a tree, seemingly keeping an eye on the kids. "You decided to show up, I see." Orochimaru slowly approached her once she landed on the training ground. "Hokage orders," Tsunade said as she took out the scroll before quickly shoving it back in. "I'm here against my will," she finished as she took a seat next to him. "Aren't we all?" Orochimaru muttered, before eyeing the kids. "Except for these idiots, I suppose. They think they'll be heroes." Tsunade felt a pang of sadness at his words as her mind produced an image of a young boy running around saying the same thing. With Orochimaru, she used to often wonder if he was trying to hurt others or if he was unintentionally being caustic. Time would prove the latter theory less likely, but if Tsunade wanted to get anything done, she couldn't really afford to discount potential resources just because of what might happen. She took a second to control her breathing before responding. "Why are these kids under your wing now?" She knew Sarutobi well enough by now. The guy always did things for a reason, and wasting a valuable resource like Orochimaru on some random kids wasn't at all like him. The dark-haired one there is a Uchiha with a lot of potential. The one with the face tattoos is the unusual case of an Inuzuka with brains, and the blonde is a Raiden prodigy. "I see. Do you think they're good enough to get through the war?" Orochimaru shrugged, seemingly unbothered by the possibility of the kids not making it. "Perhaps. They might make it out based on their current level. Still, Sarutobi wants us to make sure they do." He made quotation marks in the air with his hands. "Too valuable, in the future, for them to be wasted in war." Tsunade nodded before taking a closer look at the prospective shinobi in front of them. All three were navigating an obstacle course, and as soon as they finished, they'd go back to the beginning and repeat it again. By any normal metric, the exercise didn't make much sense at all. Orochimaru noticed her staring and answered the question that was on her lips. "I am trying to see how long it will take for them to give up and complain. Truth be told, I was expecting the Inuzuka to stop after the first 10 minutes. Tsunade didn't quite know what to make of his unorthodox teaching methods, but she had to admit that it wasn't a bad way to filter out the ones who were too impatient to be ready for war. "And what will you do if they complain?" Tsunade asked. "Have them repeat this all night." The amusement in his voice was clear. "They need to learn that they won't have the option to simply give up once the war starts. Isn't it convenient that you don't have to do any work this way?" Tsunade commented after a few more seconds of silence. Orochimaru just smiled wider in response but didn't deny the accusation. It was moments like these that made dealing with Orochimaru so annoying. Even when he was right, he'd go about things in the most annoying way possible. "I'm sure Sarutobi-sensei will be happy to know all about your innovative new teaching plan." Tsunade gave him a stern look that had been molded by years of her experience as the Hokage. "He might even give you more kids to take care of. Always the teacher's pet," he answered with a strangely petulant expression on his face. To her surprise, he quietly started walking towards the group of kids. Tsunade looked on with no little bewilderment as he signaled them to stop and started lecturing them about how they just passed his test. Orochimaru was notoriously stubborn in the best of days, so she hadn't expected her implied threat to work. Or was it just her memories of his future crimes changing the way she saw him even now? Tsunade joined the group, still unsure what to make of a young Orochimaru. Regardless, the least she could do for these kids was to teach them enough to survive their first week in the war. For the next part of the training, you will be facing off against each other in a spar. As soon as Orochimaru uttered these words, Tsunade could see the faces of all the kids light up. But this will no longer be like your spars in the school playground. Orochimaru continued. I will be teaching you to survive in a war, and that means you won't be using any of your regular weapons or tools. All the kids looked aghast at his declaration, and if the stakes weren't this high, it would almost be cute. The Uchiha piped up. Wait, I've been training with this sword since I was. I do not care if you were born holding that sword. I will not have students that throw tantrums like a child deprived of his favorite toy. The Uchiha kid looked suitably admonished and the Inuzuka let out a shameless laugh at his teammate being chewed out. I told ya, you won't stand a chance if you can't do taijutsu like we can. Inuzuka, that also means you'll fight without your dog. Orochimaru interrupted the boy's outraged shout and continued, a war isn't like your little spars at the academy. It is chaotic beyond what you could imagine, and if you can't adjust to something as simple as losing your weapon, you'll die, it's as simple as that. Hey, Aiken is not a weapon, he's my friend. Friend. Orochimaru scoffed. We are shinobi. We are all weapons to be wielded by the village. And if you can't fend for yourself when separated from your so-called friend, both of you are going to end up dead. And that was the Orochimaru that she knew and hated. Do anything to survive, step over everyone else's bodies, and be prepared to sacrifice anything. Suddenly, she realized that her nails were digging into the palm of her hands and forced herself to relax. Let's say your dog gets injured, Inuzuka. Orochimaru continued, are you fine with being useless in a fight and letting it die? The kid visibly paled at his words and Orochimaru smiled even wider, as if enjoying the effect he was having. The kid muttered something under his breath, suddenly looking a lot more childish. Orochimaru quietly stared at him, watching him squirm and fidget nervously under the weight of the question. And you, he turned to the Uchiha, are you going to simply lay down and die if your little sword breaks? Do you three want to continue playing with your toys or do you want to survive in this war? Looking a lot more docile now, two of the kids answered with a quick, yes sir, while the Inuzuka muttered something a lot more rude. Tsunade couldn't help but chuckle at the absurd sight of a young kid cursing at the person who'd grow up to become an infamous Nukenin. The old Orochimaru would have instantly made an example of him, but this one simply made a sour expression before moving on. In her mind, she knew that her old teammate hadn't done any of the heinous crimes yet. Still, it didn't change how badly he'd hurt her and others in the future, and it was unfair that she now had nowhere for all that anger to go. Even as she watched him acting harmless and interacting with the kids, there was a part of her that wished he'd reveal something to prove that he was already evil, beyond saving from the start. Anything that would give her an excuse to grab the bastard and slam him into the ground repeatedly, until all her rage was spent. Tsunade sat down under the shade of the tree and watched the training session. Her teammate instructed the kids to discard the weapons, tools, or jutsus they'd gotten used to. The kids were far from happy about having to give up all of their trump cards, but Tsunade couldn't deny that they would need to be more versatile to survive the war. Even then, who knows if they would make it anyway, when far stronger shinobi had fallen. Her morbid thoughts must have seeped into her expression because Orochimaru was suddenly looking at her with amusement writ on his face. While he wasn't evil enough to chop up kids for his science experiments yet, her teammate always took pleasure in other people's discomfort. She decided to speak up, why are you like that? Annoyance clear in her voice. Orochimaru's face morphed into a look of pure confusion and he simply stared at her, as if the question was too far-fetched for him to even consider. The expression went as quickly as it came and he had his usual smug mask on. If you keep asking strange questions like that, they might just give you another month of leave for insanity. That's just more sleep time for me. But seriously, why? Perhaps you should ask yourself why you aren't like me. Why do you still insist on holding on to sentiment, your naive fantasies? There was a tinge of bitterness in his voice. At this point, you really should know better. She couldn't really blame him, she once was as jaded as him. Knowing things really would turn out kinda alright in the end might have helped make her less cynical. Plenty of people have gone through worse things than we have. Tsunade answered, hoping to channel that air of wisdom a Hokage is supposed to have. But you don't see them constantly being a pain in the everyone else. My apologies. Orochimaru answered, voice dripping with sarcasm. Now I see the error of my ways. I will teach the kids to be nice instead of teaching them to be strong. Sarcasm is not a pretty look on you, Oryo-chan. No, You are right, he continued, Nissan well-mannered kids have such a great track record of survival, right? The implication was pretty clear. Yet another instance of Orochimaru trying to hurt her when pushed about his awful behavior. This time by throwing Naoki's death at her face. Her 17-year-old self would have most likely punched his face inside. Her 54-year-old self was still very close to punch his face inside for the comment. But with age, one learns restraint. Despite her impressive self-control, Tsunade knew from her experience as the Hokage that she couldn't let a smug little twerp like Orochimaru get away with insulting her. The response just had to be more measured than a punch to the face, usually at least. You talk a lot for someone with fewer missions under your belt than me or Jiraiya. Tsunade tried not to let her anger seep into her tone, but she wasn't sure if she was successful. Orochimaru scowled. Congratulations on completing more chores than me. It doesn't change the facts, you're just too sheltered to see it. Sheltered. You were raised by your parents while I grew up watching my entire family die one by one. And how many wars have you fought in that you get to lecture me or Jiraiya about life? You're just an amateur who's too afraid to face reality and… Before Tsunade could finish unloading onto her teammate, Orochimaru turned around and started walking away from her. So you can give it but not take it then, huh? She knew it was pretty petty from her side, but words were all she had to throw at him. Those words must have done something because Orochimaru stopped in his tracks before turning around to face her. The way he glared at her, no other emotion visible on his face, she could believe that this person would grow up to become the infamous Snake Sanin. Yet, there was a part of her that reveled in it, that wished he'd cross the line. Show her proof of his evil nature so she'd have an excuse to stamp him into the dirt. Just like a little brat who can talk big but can't take an explosive tag, I suppose. As soon as those words left Orochimaru's mouth, his face soured. Maybe it was regret, but Tsunade didn't care. In a flash, she was in front of him. You really shouldn't have said that. Her voice dangerously low as the full training ground faded into the background. That's low, even for a scumbag like you. And your people shouldn't have filled up a child's head with grandiose tales of heroics until he decides to go kill himself under my watch. Ewing failed to protect him. And now you want to blame a kid for dying. The brat made a lot of mistakes, most of them were listening to you. But that day, it wasn't a mistake, he chose to throw his life away. His tone was eerily calm but there was something uneasy in his eyes as he spoke. Threw his life away. Before he could react, she reached out and grabbed his neck, feeling a dim sense of satisfaction when his face turned into a scared grimace. Does that lie help you sleep at night, you little worm? They didn't even show you the report. He managed to wheeze out despite her attempts to ring him. She never saw the report, and once she was Hokage, she never had the guts to look into the incident. Keep talking. Her grip on his neck loosened but only barely. Strange, isn't it? Someone steps on a trap landmine and the face gets disfigured when the legs are intact. How many cases like that have you seen? Between all the grieving, she never had the time to think about the details, the little things that seemed to not make sense. Even now, his words were awakening the deep ache in her heart that she'd been trying to forget recently. For your own sake, I hope you're going somewhere with this. Tsunade warned, letting her nails bite into his skin. Okay, here's a fun story for you. A team of 6 Iowa Nin are on a recon mission, far away from home. Suddenly, these idiots run into a small team from Konoha. Not a big deal, right? Well, this team has a kid that's from a very important family and Iowa is just itching to get their hands on him. One thing led to another and by the end, we had 7 corpses to lug back home. He was assassinated by Iowa. The cogs on her head were turning at overdrive speed, all those things that never seemed to fit, finally making some sense. They weren't good enough to pull that off but your brother wanted to be the hero. He practically spit out the last word. The kid threw himself in front of an attack meant for a teammate. He was midway to counter a jutsu, the bastard changed the target last minute and I think you can guess where the bullseye was. A gasp was all she could let out, her grip finally leaving Orochimaru's neck. Her knees buckled below her as the information sank in. The shock, the hurt, betrayal. She spent 38 years of her life carrying the pain of losing Naoki. All the comments people secretly made mocking his death. Like a finger on an open sore. His dreams, his family, he threw all that away just to play hero. And to thank him for his bravery, the great village of Konoha suppressed the report, so you'll remember him as a gormless moron who stepped on a trap. It was clear that Orochimaru was beyond answering her questions and was just ranting to let out his hidden frustrations. If Tsunade wasn't so overwhelmed, she might have even joined him in his anger. For a few seconds Tsunade stood there, trying to take in a deep breath, yet the air felt so thin and scarce she could barely fill her lungs. Pain and grief were things she'd been dealing with, but this was different. And then there was something she didn't expect in the concoction of emotions. Relief. Relief of knowing Nawaki was a great ninja, relief of getting some truth in a world full of deceit, even the selfish part of her feeling relief of knowing she taught him enough to not fall for a trap. And with that, she could breathe again. Slowly, little by little, until she finally gained enough control over her body to pick herself off the ground. Orochimaru was still staring at her with an expression that she'd never seen on him before. Was that pity? Even if it was that really all he had to offer her at this moment? Whatever it was, one thing that Tsunade did know was that any reaction she offered to this worm would be a waste of her energy and time. She turned around and walked away from the training ground. The more she walked, the more she found herself drowning in the newfound well of emotions, until she was walking in a daze. She let her feet guide her out of the bustle of Konoha and towards the quiet of the Senju forest. So many thoughts were running through her overwhelmed mind that even the familiar trees near her home couldn't make her feel anything but numb. As if running on autopilot, she dimly felt her hands opening the door and her feet crossing the living room. She heard a person say something, a distant part of her mind realizing it's Mito, but the words seemed like white noise in her head. It wasn't until she felt her grandmother's arms around her that the weight of the revelation fell on her. The barrier broke, tears flowed, and finally she could let out the sobs she had been holding on. That was part 1 of Naruto's powerful harem journey. If you enjoyed it, like, share, and subscribe to Fox Fanfiction. Comment below, who is your favorite kunoichi?